think that we need to be equipped to the point that we are at least what Peter said. He said, be ready to give an answer. Not get ready, but be ready. Hold on just a second. There we go. There we go. Can you hear me now? All right. It is another edition of Urban Logia Live. This is your friendly and favorite neighborhood apologist, Damon Richardson. And again, so grateful for you who are joining tonight. We've got an incredible discussion lined up, and we're going to be doing the very same thing that we did during the last Genesis conversation, where we will be bringing people up a little later to join the conversation and ask questions for the panel. And so if you are watching, and I think you're already in, let us know where you are watching from. Go ahead and rep your city. Let us know where you are watching the Urban Logia live conversation. I see Charlene Austin is already in. God bless you, Charlene. Who else is on? I know there might be a little bit of a delay between the actual broadcast and you watching it. And so there we go. We'll give you a minute to catch up. There we go. Fredericksburg, Virginia is watching. Bainbridge, Georgia is watching. Ken from Columbia, South Carolina is also watching. Brooklyn, New York is in the house. I see you. Wonderful. Dallas, Texas. There you go. And the 305, Miami is watching. Beaufort, Georgia, right around the corner, is watching as well. Keep repping your city. If you haven't already done so, subscribe to the channel. Help me get the number. Help me get the number of subscribers to the officially to the 14,000 mark, and ultimately building further out to 15,000. So help me grow. And the best way to do it is by recommending the channel to somebody that you know. So if it's a blessing to you, if you're learning, if you're growing, if it's stretching your faith, your understanding of the Word of God, pushing you to study the Word of God more and appreciate the value of Scripture more, then go ahead and not only like and subscribe, but definitely recommend the channel to somebody else. I see. Okay, there we go. Port of Spain and Trinidad is watching, and we've got Lakeland, Florida. Who else do we have here? New Jersey. I see you, my bro. Aaron Carr is watching. Thank you for the subscription. Thanks so much. And there we go. We believe in it. 20,000 subscribers by years end. My stomping grounds, Queens, New York, is watching. Thank you so much, Sherry, for sharing this. And we've got Tulsa, Oklahoma is watching, and also Be More. And so listen, we will not waste any more time. So I've got my brother. So we are going back to Genesis, since this was by popular demand. I mean, literally the response was overwhelming when we talked about essentially answers in Genesis. So we're going to do more answers in Genesis, and we're going to go back through many key texts in the book of Genesis and have some incredible theological and biblical discussion around it. We'll talk about context, and we'll probably agree on most, even disagree on some, but you'll be able to hear the nuance in these conversations. And for many of you, it would probably provide some answers, or at least somewhat of a start in your own research into looking into what evidence supports whatever view you might hold, right? So we're going to be doing that tonight. Washburn, Tennessee is watching. The DMV, and Land Lakes. All right, all right. That's down there near where my mom is, actually, in that area. And so there we go. There we go. Uh Arlington, Texas, always repping. Flint is watching. And so listen, let me bring my brothers up. You already know them by now. We've got the theological Clark Kent, my brother Rick Barboa. And listen, I tell you, we had an incredible conversation last, I believe it was, I think Monday or something like that, or Wednesday or third. I can't remember when it was. But we're back, and I've got my brother, the theological Idris Elba, is back with us again. And hey, so I gotta say this. Hold on, let me widen this out here. So Rick's wife made a, you know what? Where is the? I should have put it up here. Hold on, hold on, hold on. Because I think that I've got it somewhere in my I got to show you this. This is hilarious. And let me see. I think I got it somewhere in my folder. I do. All right. So I'm going to share this on screen because this is hilarious. Rick's wife did this to us. And let me see if I can pull it up here on, let me see. Is it in recent? I think so. Let me take a look at this real quick. Ah, here it is. So Rick's wife did this. She made from the last thumbnail that we did, and so the way that this goes is I'm supposed to be the Dominican and Mexican outfit, and my brother Jason is supposed to be the Cuban in his Mexican outfit, and then Rick is the Mexican. So, so I thought this was incredible, and maybe on the next thumbnail we'll probably actually use this one right here. This is gold right here. This is incredible, and so just having a little bit of fun with it, and but we're going to get into this conversation. There we go. There we go. We got Philly watching. Philly's in the house. God bless you. And so listen, we're going to jump into this conversation because we don't want to delay anymore. And so I'm thinking that a really good place to start is probably going to be maybe going back to Genesis 4. And the only reason I want to go there is because I think we left some scraps on the table talking about Cain. And so one of the things that I'm particularly interested in Genesis 4 is, and this is because I've heard this notion many times, coming up, when I became a Christian, that essentially Cain's offering was rejected because he had offered essentially the wrong offering. And so I don't want to leave that out there, just in case there are people who are thinking that way, that he offered the wrong thing, therefore God rejected his offering. I'm going to throw out my position really quick. I'm going to summarize it. I don't think his offering was wrong. I think God rejected the way in which he offered his offering, very similar to the rebuke of Paul in 1 Corinthians, I believe it is 11, where there's an adverb there. He's talking about taking communion unworthily, not in an unworthy state, but unworthily, as in there is some condemnation to the sacrilegious behavior at the Lord's Supper. And so when I'm looking at this text, where's Cain is a farmer, evidently, and Abel is a shepherd. God is always asking, and they seem to know this, obviously, because they were taught that offerings would come from either livestock or from whatever they grew, from, from an agrarian standpoint. So this is not a matter of the wrong kind of offering. In fact, the writer of Hebrews gives us some contextual clue here. He says that Abel offered a more excellent offering or sacrifice than his brother Cain, and more excellent is qualitative. So that tells you that there's something about the way in which Abel approaches his offering to the Lord versus the way that Cain approaches his offering to the Lord, and in which Cain is aware that what he's doing is wrong. In fact, God even tells him that sin is crouching at the door, right? That he has within his ability to reject the decisioning that he is about to make in terms of making this offering the wrong way, right? And so when we look at offerings later, we see bloody offerings, we see non-bloody offerings. So there's no reason to think that the issue here is categorically tight. Talk to me, brothers. What do y'all think about that? And feel free to expand it out or do whatever you want with it. But I felt like we ought to go back to 4 and maybe discuss that. Jay, we can't hear you. We can't hear you.
Right now.
There we go. There we go.
All right, good. Yeah, I think that was a good foundation. Oh my Lord, look who's in the house. Greg, my guy. Good to see you. Bro, we need you. Right. We need you, bro. Right. Especially as a musician now. You know I've been after you, bro. Let's go.
Right.
That's my dude. Good to see him. And my sis that you just put up there as well, Eve. She is in Dominica.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember her, Rick. She used to be in Bible study. So it's good to see her. I've known her for years. Great friend of mine. But thank you. Wonderful, thank you, wonderful. All of you who have come in. Thank you so much. I love the foundation that you set. But Rick was actually acting out what I was going to say. And I'm glad that I jumped to it. He gave me the opportunity to get to it first. Heart postures is one thing that we have to look at as pertains to Cain. The Bible speaks of, I'm going to go far to come back. The Bible speaks of Israel offering sacrifices, holy days, and all of these different things. But I believe it's in Ezekiel. Yeah, it says, and Ezekiel 33:31 says, and they come to you as people come, and they sit before you as my people, and they hear what and they hear what you say, but they will not do it for with lustful talk in their mouths they act, their hearts are set on their gain. No, that's not the scripture I was looking for. It's Isaiah. There it is. There, okay. Excuse me. Because the people draw near with their mouth and honor me with their lips, while their hearts, that's the part I'm talking about, their hearts are far from me. And the fear of me is a commandment taught by men. Now, this we have to really pay attention to. Why? Because we see God has given instruction on how to approach him. And this kind of goes somewhat back to what we was talking about with the Tower of Babel. The men and women in Babel wanted to approach God their way. They wanted God to come to them rather than God coming to them as he chooses.
Right.
However, these individuals decided that they're going to offer sacrifices to God. They're going to give God what he supposedly asked for, but their heart was far from him. So you have to look at why God rejects his sacrifice is first and foremost because his heart wasn't towards God. We can do all of these things towards God, but if our heart has not been regenerated, has not been changed towards God, then the sacrifice means nothing.
Right. Oh, excellent. Excellent, man. Excellent. Good stuff. Good stuff.
You're still muted, my guy.
was off.
There
That's
we
why.
go.
There you go.
I seen it
Yeah.
turn green. If you got the Shure V7, I think yours does the same thing that mine does. You got to pay attention to that light. Yeah.
Yeah, there's not much more I could add to that. Why is this doing this? Hold on, I hear echo. Y'all hear that?
Yeah, we do.
All right, let me work that out before we
I
go any
think you're
forward.
good now. I think you're good now.
Okay. All right. Yeah. There's not much more I could add to that. I think this just falls in line.
You're back out here.
Yeah, we lost you again, Mexican.
Okay. He may have to cut out and there he is. Let's see. All right. He may come back in or go back out again. But yeah. Here's some contextual things I think from Genesis chapter 4. So God says, here it is. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. And if we look through the history of offerings, especially as we start getting later into, for instance, Numbers, also Leviticus, there is some content on offerings in Deuteronomy as well. As we start looking in the Torah at what we find in terms of offerings, one of the things that we consistently see is that God is always asking for the first yield of everything, right? So if it's animals, the firstling of the flock, right? And if it is vegetation or fruit or whatever, it's called the first fruits. Now, there are people who would make the argument to say, well, the first of everything is the best of everything. I don't think that's the issue. I think the first is to say that you thought about God first, that you have regarded God in your heart above everything else as an act of priority, as an act of prioritized love. Let me give to God first, right? So think about it like this. If we often have this kind of hypothetical conversation and thought, if you hit the lotto, for 500 mil, what are you going to do first, right? Or who are you going to give money to first? And the reality is as hypothetical as that is, and I wish that you all would hit the lotto for whatever good it would bring into your life. But I'll say this is that whatever you do first says a lot about what you prioritize, right? And for people, it's like, man, I'm gonna take care of my mom and dad, make sure that they're set, or I'm gonna give to my local church, this, that, together. I think all of those are wonderful things, and it speaks volumes to the affection that you have for certain relationships. And I think giving God the first of the yield says that. And so it would seem that this is why God's has no regard for Cain. Seems like Cain is just wanting to offer to God whatever he wants, right? Here, God, with an attitude like, let me just give this to you. And I'll say this: acceptable worship is only worship that God prescribes in the way that he prescribes it. So I think there's some homiletical value here in the text, as well as exegetical value. And but Rick, jump back in, man.
Can I just jump in real quick before he comes back? I thought you was gonna hit it, but look at the end of verse 4 and then verse 5 again. It says, the Lord had regard for Abel. Notice it was Abel, the person he had regard for first before his sacrifice. And I thought that's where you was going when you was going to read that. I thought that's where you was going. But and look again in verse 5, the rest of it, it says, but he did not have regard for Cain and for his sacrifice. So again, it's not so much the things, but the person. Where is your heart towards God? Because wherever your heart is, that's where your treasure is.
Right.
You know, so all of these things, I sit back and look at, you know, we can give as much as we want to give to God. But as you rightly said, it's just like, here, God, you can have whatever. Not Absolutely. With the disposition of giving with, you know, like Corinthians says, giving cheerfully. And the mere fact you're giving cheerfully is because your heart position is towards God.
Right. Excellent.
Clark, right, how's my mic doing now?
You're good, bro. You're good. Yep.
Yeah.
Good.
It was dying. I had to plug it in. That's why it kept dying. That's what it was. But I think just to add on to what you guys are saying, we have to take into consideration who the original audience is of this text. This is not written to Abel or Cain. This is written to Israel about Abel and Cain. And I think when you look at it through that lens, it starts to make a lot more sense, especially with the language. This the language of the first born of his flock. That right there, it already carries that covenantal language. It's covenantally pregnant. It's a covenantally pregnant phrase there. And it's in contrast to the offering that that Abel gives. Now, it's not as if you can't give a first fruit offering from your yield of your crops. You can, but the point is that it's not written that way. Moses purposely doesn't write it that way, and I think that's covenantally significant. I also think that there is also working in and through all of this. Again, like we talked about last week, you have the line of the promise and the line of the serpent that is being described. It's the outworking of that enmity that is going to be had throughout all time, and the current iteration of it that we'll see that's happening. I guess we could say currently to the text is Israel is being propped up as that line of the promise, and so these cautionary tales, I wouldn't limit them to just simply cautionary tales, but they do function as that way. They form the social dynamics, the covenantal dynamics, the ways in which Israel is to approach God. These tales are there to instruct them on how to approach God in worship. Be not like Cain, right? Be like Abel, essentially, right, who offers the first fruit. Israel was the firstborn of God, and so there's all of these different phrases that are covenantally pregnant. And you have to import all of that into your thinking when you're looking at a text like this. Heart posture is another thing. You guys covered that very, very extensively, because that is very key to this. It does matter what we do. It isn't simply that we adhere. Like Israel found this out, especially with what Jason was mentioning out of Isaiah. That text right there, Jesus will quote from it. He'll quote from that very same thing, and he's assessing Israel in his day, that these people they're close to me with their mouth, but they're far from me with their heart.
Right.
And so that point right there, it's and in other places, you know, when Jesus is correcting the Pharisees about, hey, go and find out what this means. I desire mercy rather than sacrifice. The point was, I don't just desire you to just adhere to the letter of the law over and against the point of the law, the reason, the underpinning reason is behind the law itself. You are using it to create a weight and put a yoke on people. But the point of the law, that as God has given it to the people, is because he desires mercy and not sacrifice. And so it's not just doing them and then your heart is elsewhere.
Right.
You do them with your heart engaged.
There you go.
The first thing you offer to the Lord is your heart before you even engage in any of the stipulations that are in the law. And so I think that's what's just underpinning a text like this. Also, again, you can't get around the election language.
Yeah.
It's in this text. And I'm not saying we need to just go full on Calvinist here. That's not the point. But there is God choosing and God excluding. He's making the choice here. And so all of that, I think, is all at play in this text.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what Jason was pointing out, which I had never seen. And I really appreciate that. It says that he had regard for Abel and his offering. And which again speaks to what you're pointing out. It's the person's heart, God seeing that. And then he is seeing the offering as a manifestation of what he's seeing in their heart. So it's maybe in some formulaic way, the quality of our worship reveals the condition of our heart, right? But God sees the heart as the starting point and then looks at the offering as essentially the, pun intended, fruit of what he sees in the heart. And so because Cain's heart's no good, well, his offering's no good. Because Abel's heart is right, or his offering is right, right? So that was a really good. I gotta use that, man. I had not looked at that. That is an important combination right there from a literary standpoint and a theological standpoint that is really easy to miss. And I don't think that that's happenstance that it's written that way. I think that is, yeah, that's good. That's real good. Anybody else? Anything else that we want to squeeze out of this one before we move on back to we'll go up to chapter 5. Let's go to chapter 5. And the only reason I want to go there is because we also left this on the table. And Rick also wrote a great article on this as well. A lot of this stuff comes out of conversations we've had, teachings that we've done. But nonetheless, we're having these conversations now in live in front of you all. So there's this starting with 5 and then essentially ending right around 11. So between chapter 5 and chapter 11, you have these genealogies that give us the ages of humans that are essentially astronomically long. For instance, we know of Methuselah, 969 years, and Adam, 930 years. There's some other cats that even got close to that. And then you've got, 800 and, 850 or, 700. And you kind of start seeing this tapering off over some time. And then, of course, you start seeing, of course, some reasonable numbers, but still exceptionally high comparatively to our world. I mean, Abraham lives to be about 175 years old. I think Jacob even longer than that. Or what was it? I think Jacob was 130, I believe it was. I think it was he lived either a little bit longer or a little shorter than Abraham. But nonetheless, I mean, these are impressive numbers. But they have significantly declined from an earlier period, right? And so the question is, what kind of view should we have of these long ages? Should we have essentially a literalist historical view, or should we have more of a symbolic rhetorical view? So the literal historical view, which is championed by Whitcomb and Morris, hold that the ages are essentially straightforwardly historical, and that they essentially reflect pre-flood earth conditions that obviously, and we'll speak more to that could have sustained lifespans for that long. And then, of course, if you are familiar with John Walton in his The Lost World of Genesis 1, he holds to more of a rhetorical view, whereas he describes, and this is one of the things, and Rick will speak maybe a little bit more to this, where he uses the ancient Near East as a literary context showing how, for instance, kings in the ancient Near East would routinely use exaggerated regnal numbers, to say, hey, for instance, the Sumerian kings, their list, they would describe themselves on record for reigning for tens of thousands of years. And so the way that Walton argues is that this view of Genesis participates in a recognizable literary convention. And so the idea is that what they were doing in these long ages is essentially they were literary markers of things like honor, authority, primordial closeness to deities. And so they were ways of essentially saying that by using literary devices. Right. And so let's throw that around. I'm interested to I know how Rick's going to argue. I want to hear where Jason lands. I feel like I'll be honest. I'm very convinced about the ancient Near Eastern argument. I think that's some good stuff. I'm not unconvinced, however, that these are not literary ages, though. I kind of think that there's some literal aspects to these ages as well. I'll give more of my argument later, but I just wanted to frame it, set it up. Let me go ahead and alley-oop over to my brothers here and jump on in.
Go ahead, Jace. Go ahead, brother.
Yeah, we did a good time on this in our Bible study, and I am going to do the right thing and concede to the Mexican.
Oh, you got stand first.
You know why? Come on, you know how we do. I haven't studied enough on this particular, and I don't want to just guess and just talk because I'm here.
I got you.
I used to lean towards the literal interpretation, but the more we went through Genesis, is the more I understood the ancient Near East background of how they used it. And I'm glad that you mentioned about the kings as well, because we discussed that as well. Yeah. So that's the reason why I would prefer to really concede to the Mexican and let him go ahead. Yeah. He's more studied on that, to be honest.
I would say this. This is a quote right here. It says, "We cannot take a text more literally than by understanding as fully as possible what the original writer intended to communicate. A casual, superficial reading should not be mistaken for a literal one." Now, we use this terminology of literal, and automatically that is in contradistinction to figurative because of our sort of modern, conventional way of approaching these things. But if the author is intending figurative language, then that is the literal reading of the text, actually.
Right.
And so when you mentioned the Sumerian king lists, that is one key window into what may have been possibly happening here. And let me just say up front, could people, by the grace of God, live for 900 upwards of 900 years, under 1,000 years? Yes, they could have. I am not convinced that is what Moses is conveying. I think Moses is operating off of the counting convention that is normative for that day, or for that day, of talking about that period of time, the antediluvian period, the pre-flood period, right, wherein everybody, we talk about the Sumerian king lists, you have people that are reigning 28,000 years in that view. And so these numbers are not meant so that you can do the math and add it up and say, okay, well, me add this number, and okay, now we have, the age of the earth from that. I think that's completely missing the point altogether.
That can get you into some the there. Yeah.
That is just a hyper literalistic reading that I think is operating off of our modern paradigm of faith versus science, wherein I would argue there is no fight between the Bible and science. There's just a fight between bad readings by Christians and even worse readings or determinations by scientists. So that are operating off of a paradigm or a thought process called scientism. That is something we need to combat. But I don't think the Bible is operating on that sort of either or playing field here. You have the truth that science gives, and then you have the truth that the scripture gives, and both of them are not in contradiction to each other. They're just speaking to two different aspects. And so I would argue that this is a sexagesimal counting convention, right? Now, what that means is in the Mesopotamian world, right, they used a base 60 number system. Now, we still use it. You have 60 minutes in a minute, 60 seconds or 60 minutes in an hour, 60 seconds in a minute, 360 degrees. We still have some of that in our modern world, right? And so they use a decimal system or a base 10 system. That's what we use. We use that sort of system. But in ancient Mesopotamia, they commonly used a sexagesimal system, which was a base 60. So instead of counting 10, 100, 1000, that's the base 10 system that we use. They used they often thought in multiples of 60 or of 6, 60, 600, 3600. That'd be 60 times 60 there, 36,000, so on and so forth, and just keep it going, right? And so this matters for us in biblical interpretation, especially when we're talking about the ages of these individuals that are mentioned in Genesis 5 in the genealogies and Genesis 11 in the genealogies there. It's because these numbers, they carry a rhetorical force. They function rhetorically rather than just arithmetic, than just so you just do the numbers there, right? Now, as modern readers, we will assume that every number functions as a statistical figure. That's our modern convention. You got to think of it like this. This is how Dr. Walton will describe it. You have the ancient world that has its own cultural river that everybody swims in. Now, oftentimes actually, Israel will swim against the current of that river, but they will not get out of it. They will be in the river. So how they talk about things would be normative to anybody from that time period would recognize what they're saying. Right. Even if they're pushing against it, they would still recognize it. We operate in a modern river wherein the things that are in our river are not the same things that are in the river of the ancient world. And so when we try to approach this text from our river and we're not aware of it, we're going to miss things, or we're going to import things into the text that are relevant or emphasized in our world. And so we have to recognize that impulse of wanting to create arithmetic, or these are just hard literal numbers, is coming from our worldview that prizes empirical thought, hard numbers. We must reconstruct the entirety of the event, or otherwise the event did not happen. It's just purely figurative. In the ancient world, that's not how it works. That's not how they think about it. They don't. There's no, like, for instance, there is no line between the natural and the supernatural. If we were using this type of language, or those categories to an ancient Near Easterner, they would be like, what are you talking about? Anything that happens in the natural world is happening because something is making it happen in the supernatural world or in the unseen world. That's kind of maybe they would say it. There's no divide between it. That's how it works. And so these numbers are representative, right? In the ancients, they are idealized, they're symbolic, they're rhetorical, and they're literary. Now, that doesn't make them false. That's the other impulse we need to guard from. This doesn't mean it's false. These are false numbers. It means that they're functioning differently than a modern census report. Right. And so when we look at Genesis 5 and 11 in particular, this extraordinary lifespan that we see from Adam, he's 930, Seth 912. You have Methuselah 969. I think he's the one who lives the longest. Methuselah is the one that lives the longest as far as the years are concerned. This sounds strange to us, but when you look at it through the literary or the literature that is existing at the time, the Sumerian king list, before the flood, you have kings that live 18,600 years. See how these are all multiples of 6? 28,000 years, 28,800 years, 36,000 years. These are just some numbers that are from the Sumerian king list. You could find this in the Anet that's written by Dr. Pritchett. I'd have to put in the chat. I'll find it and put it in there for you. But you can see all the Sumerian king lists there. He's captured it and put it in English so you can read it. And so these numbers are built on these sexagesimal counting conventions. And so what I think is happening here is the message is that the ancient ancestors, they did live extraordinary lives. That's the point. They lived extraordinary lives, but they were still mortal. And that's why I think even though Moses is utilizing that counting convention, the fact that the lives are slowly and over time decreasing is demonstrating that these people are still mortal. The people that are existing in the pre-flood, antediluvian period are not any different as far as humans are concerned. We are all going to die. All of us will. I think that's what's the theological sort of emphasis that's happening there. And I think Genesis is far less interested in mathematical speculation. Like Moses is not interested in that.
Right.
He's not. He's more interested in tracing how death has spread throughout the earth after the fall, and he's utilizing these numbers here, right? Now, Nahum Sarna. Now he is I don't think he's a Christian, but he is a Jewish scholar, an ancient Near Eastern scholar. He compared these things. This is where I got a lot of my research from as well, with these Mesopotamian traditions of how you count here. He brought that in there. And he says that Genesis presents a remarkably restrained figures while still preserving the notion of primeval longevity. So he's using that there. Now, involved in this conversation, you have to talk about the rhetorical and the rhetorical way in which numbers are used in the Bible. That's how I was trying to say this. You have 7, you have 40, you have 120. All of these types of things, they carry rhetorical force rather than just mere statistical 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth type of force. And so, I could take up a lot more time explaining this.
Yeah, no,
I think what's happening here is that Moses is engaging in that sexagesimal counting convention. I don't think that people actually lived these ages, and I think that there's some data that. Even in, like, for instance, when you look at the surprise on Sarai's mind when she's like, I'm going to be pregnant at this age, at this old age, why would that be such a surprise to her when all of her ancestors have been giving birth all the way up until they're 800, 700 years old? Why for her is it because it's not that long removed from her wherein people were giving birth for that long. And so I think that these numbers, again, are functioning rhetorically rather than just mere arithmetic or mere, solid, or we could use a modern terminology, modern literal numbers. I don't think that that's what's happening here. Even when you see just one last thing here, right? With the significance of 120, it is a misnomer to think that the 120 that we see in Genesis chapter 6, where it says his days will be 120 years, would mean actual years of life. It is now more common to think that these 120 years are the time clock until the flood comes, or 120 is also a way in which to speak rhetorically in the Bible of a complete time. 120 years is a complete time. If you lived 120 years, if you were written, if somebody wrote a history about you or biography about you, and they said you lived 120 years, that was them saying you lived a complete, full life. And so when it says that Jacob lived past that, it's describing that Jacob lived a life that was full to its fullest extent and wasn't cut short in a sense. And so I think all of that is at play when you're looking at the genealogies themselves.
Those are some really strong arguments. I've got to say, those are really strong arguments. I'll offer some thought here and maybe even some pushback in a few areas. I'm convinced that the functional aspect of your argument is what we're reading in terms of the way that Moses writes. Things are giving us more of a functional picture because it's moving towards this redemptive meta narrative, and so everything is functioning in some sort of way, good or bad, right? So you see that word tov in Genesis 1, God's, and what He made. And that's not some abstract term. That's not like, it's not like when we say cool or that's dope. That's, if you ask somebody, well, define that. We just and then we go back to circular phrases again. What does dope mean? Well, that means just really good. What does cool mean? Cool means dope. what does dope mean? Dope means good, right? And at the end of the day, we mean to say something positive. And I think good is doing something more than that. It's functional. It's doing what God has intended it to do. And so I think this kind of does form a motif across the literature, that things are either doing what they're supposed to be doing, as in God's design, God's will, God's plan, or they're not. And when they are not, that's not tov, that's not good, that's ra, that's evil, right? And so we can see essentially this kind of binary at play in all of these literary texts. Some things are doing what they're supposed to do. For instance, Cain is not doing what he's supposed to do, and Abel is, right? So you can kind of see this binary. Now, where I think that I'll go back to an earlier statement that you made about, and I like that because I often say that as well. Figurative can be literal if what we mean by literal is what the author literally intends to communicate, right? So literal has a broad range of what can be considered literal, and figurative language can be part of that. The idea of literal is, what is the author literally communicating? That what does he literally mean? And so I will say, I think from the standpoint of this whole argument, that the honest scholarly picture here is that there is no real consensus on whether it is wooden literal, as in a chronological aging, or whether it is more of a rhetorical type figurative thing. There's no real consensus on that. We're just giving you arguments that other scholars have made. When it comes down to where the scholars land, they're going to be in one of those areas or the other, right? So we're not saying what's what, we're saying what we are most convinced by. So I think that's important. I am convinced by the fact that these are literal ages, and the reason, and again, that doesn't deny the literary functionality or any other intended meaning that that Moses might have for it. And I'll tell you why. Well, number one, if we see that sin has affected not only humanity, but it has affected everything on earth. And we believe that because part of the doctrine of glorification involves this, as Peter put it, this restoration of all things, right? The apokatastasis, as the Greek word, where there is this recovery, this renewal, if you will, of the heavens and the earth and everything that sin has affected in creation. And he sees this new heavens and the new earth, and the old order and everything that's been affected by sin is passing away, literally, like the very term for death, right? So if we understand that that is literal, that sin has literally affected creation, I don't think that we've got to get too far into the scientific weeds to conclude plausibly that whereas men were intended to live uninterrupted before sin, that the reason we see a gradual decline is because we also see the gradual effects of sin as it affects not just humans, but living conditions on the earth, right? And so as living conditions on the earth set in, that what is that? What would we naturally expect that to affect? Well, it would affect genetics, right? And so when we start dealing, when we talk about diseases and certain kinds of illnesses, it's that these things, many of these things are caused environmentally, and others of these things are literally passed down genetically. Well, how did that happen? Well, we'd have to first start with the fact that there was a time, even after the fall, where there were no genetic defects in humans, where people probably never got sick. Illness is the result of the impact of sin on the human body, right? As well as environmental type issues, right? Now, I'm not saying that, it didn't get cold or hot, but I would imagine that, for instance, an earthquake doesn't occur for a while. I would imagine that tornadoes and other natural cataclysmic type events ultimately and gradually begin to occur. And that is because the earth is now impacted by the condition of sin, and it is reacting in ways that also lead to what you would call natural evil, right? So imagine how long time went on before the first dude was struck by a bolt of lightning, right? That, who knows how long that was. But today, people get killed by lightning strikes every single year, right? And so this is what I'm talking about, is natural evil. But natural evil is something that gradually takes footing and hold in the earth. Well, I would surmise that, given the conditions of the earth, minus all of the things that sin has created in terms of smog and disease and all of that, I could see human life being sustained for that length of time, because they don't have the conditions that ultimately contribute to the lessening of life, right? And so I think that is consistent with what God told Adam in the garden when he says, in the day that you eat, you will surely die. Well, not only does he immediately have his relationship with God severed, hence spiritual death, but what we also see is this gradual march towards death. And I think what we are seeing is real. I don't think that the Sumerian kings I don't think that's a great argument, because none of these men, while they may have even been patriarchal from the Abrahamic standpoint, and not even from the Abrahamic standpoint, is many of these men are not even from Abraham's line. The fact of the matter is that none of them are considered great. None of them are particularly kings. They're just humans who are progenitors of particular lines of families. But I think what we see in terms of the gradual decrease of lifespan is not only consistent with what we see in terms of an increase of sin. So it's like driving a stick shift. When you're getting ready to shift gears, you depress the accelerator and press in the clutch, right? And so what we see here is a gradual decrease of lifespan, but Moses is also arguing for a significantly gradual increase in sin. So notice, by the time we get to Genesis 6, there is a in the Greek a pleroo, a fullness, in the sense that God is like, I am fed up. Well, he doesn't get fed up overnight. There's been some buildup over time, which is a good way of thinking about, well, what's been going on in the earth that brings God to a place that he's like, I can't suffer with these people for much longer, right? I'm gonna wipe them from the face of the earth, right? And so there is this gradual buildup of sin. In fact, the language that Moses employs is one of the words that Moses uses is violence, and it's not physical violence. It's the violence that he associates the sin with is a mental violence. And then he explains what he means. He says, because the thoughts of their heart were evil continuously, right? So God's looking at this buildup, and I think what's happening here with the 120 is God's sovereignly putting a governor in the lifespan of humanity. I know Moses, I mean, I know Abraham ends up living 175 years and this, that, or the other. So it's not that it came to a hard stop right then. I think it starts gradually decreasing, because by the time we get to Moses, well, he is a 120 years when he dies. And I think what God is doing as an act of mercy is saying, if humans live this long and sin this long, humanity is unsustainable. And so as an act of mercy, I think he puts a general governor so that as long as humans live, and even if they choose to be evil all their days, well, they can't be evil for 800 years. Imagine that, right? Like imagine a dude like Donald Trump living for 750 years. Like that's crazy, right? Like he, to me, is unimaginably evil. I'm just putting it out there, right? I don't care who you vote for, but imagine a dude like Trump living to 850 years. That's bad news for a lot of people. And I think this is what's going on. I don't think that, and again, I don't think that these are necessarily precise numbers. I'll definitely yield to the notion of preciseness. I don't think they're necessarily precise numbers, but I do think that they are roundabout. And so if a cat's living for 800 and something years, it's 800 and something years, whether that's 39 or 20, 820. I don't think the preciseness is, but I do think the length is plausible when we consider that. And so take for instance, right? So if ages are not important, then Abraham living to 175 years can't be considered a literal 175 years, right? We can't switch off from the earlier explanation. We can't say, oh yeah, but his 175 years is a real 175 years versus somebody else who lived 775. Or for instance, when Jacob lives 130, is it really 130? Is it well, he just lived a full life? At the end of the day, what I'm saying is that at some point, these ages actually do matter in the sense that these are actual ages. They did live for some period of time. And I think whether we're precise with the all the way down to the 10th is not as important. But I do think these ages are real ages in that sense. And so that's my argument for it. I mean, it's not the most articulate argument, but I think that there's good reason to see that there. Let me just mention this one last. So in Genesis 5, for instance, it says that Noah was about 500 years old when he had Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Right now, this is functioning in some way. I heard Rick's argument there when he was talking about, what was the term that you used, brother? Septadecimal.
It's a sexagesimal. I'll write it in the comments.
but you see these random kind of ages, right? I don't know that these comport with a sexagesimal way of counting, because they don't count by 60s. They're random. So 50, again, 939. They're all over the place in numbers. So this is what I think is interesting, because there are people who would say that the 120 years is about the time that it took to build the ark, and I don't think that that's what that's saying at all. So the only way to get there is to think, because when Noah does enter the ark, the text does tell us that he's 600 years old. So there is a 100-year gap approximately between Genesis 5, when he's 500 years old, and it says that he has, I think it is, where is it? Genesis 5 and 32, when he fathers Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So he's basically around 500 years old. Now, we don't know the time between Genesis 5:32 and when God comes to Noah and says, build me an ark. Most people depend on this literary stretch that from 532, it must have been somewhere shortly after that, somewhere in the year that God says it. And they need that to happen so that they can start counting from 500 to 600. But what if God came to Noah 65 years in to when he has Shem, Ham, and Japheth? What if it's when he's 580? Right? We don't know when. So we have to speculate when God actually came to Noah. So we really don't know how long Noah was building the ark. But even if we wanted to go the 120 route, we couldn't. And the reason we couldn't is because the text also tells us in Genesis 11 that Shem was 100 years old when he started fathering, which the text says 2 years after the flood, which meant that whenever God came to Noah, when they entered the ark, Shem was 98 years old. If there's any literality to ages in any sense, if that means anything at all, Shem was 98 years old when he entered the ark. And when he got off the ark, he was 98 years old, unless his birthday came somewhere in them 40 days and 40 nights, right? But at the end of the day, he doesn't start having children, according to Genesis 11, until 2 years after the flood. And the scripture says he's 100. Again, I don't think that these are hard, precise numbers, but these numbers have to be real. Otherwise, what's the point in even giving us ages and then approximating events in tandem to these ages, right? And so if he doesn't father, if he fathers children 2 years after the flood, if he's 100, then if the 100 has no meaning, then the 2 years later after the flood loses its numerical value as well. And that's what I'm saying is that numbers have to function in some literal way. Otherwise, what we're going to end up with is essentially a nursery rhyme of sorts, where there is some value to the story, even if there's no historical literality to it. We're just saying, well, Humpty Dumpty. What do we learn from Humpty Dumpty? Now, there was no real Humpty Dumpty, but there's some value in the story. Otherwise, what we end up with is where your liberal theologians ended up saying that these are essentially just myths, right? So if we lean too hard into ancient Near Eastern hermeneutic, ultimately we end up where essentially Wellhausen and many of your other German liberal theologians ended up, where they're saying these myths were essentially invented in the post-exilic period, that they weren't communicating. This is not Moses communicating with Israel. This is essentially post-exilic prophets using these myths as a way to encourage faithfulness to a Yahwistic group of Israelites that emerge out of exile, or this, that, or the other. And so I'm cautious about where things end up going. Again, and this is just where I land. This is not me saying this is how it is. So anyway, I think we might have spent a lot of time there, but I hopefully that's encouraging and even informative. Any last words on any of that?
Yeah, I think rhetorically, Moses is telling us about the spread of sin. I think even when you have the final number of each life, notice how the text will say, it'll say, and Adam lived 930 years, and then it'll say, and he died.
Right.
Noah lived 950 years,
and he died. Right. No, I fully agree with that.
And he died. I think that's that he's telling that story, and I think he can be using the conventional sort of counting system in order to tell that story, because I think all of the writings that are in existence at the time, maybe relatively speaking contemporary to it, they all have this antediluvian period where people are just, they live these crazy long lives. And even when we, like with the liberal theologians, what they got wrong is when they use the idea of myth, again, they brought in the modern idea of what myth means. Myth is in contradistinction to history. And I'm just like, that they are obviously wrong, because they were trying to demythologize the Bible and take out all the miraculous. I still absolutely believe in the miraculous abilities of God to do whatever he wants. But I think we don't have to place the text in our modern paradigm. You don't have to do that. It can be speaking in its own current understanding of what myth means. Because myth is not, in the ancient world, myth is not a made-up story. That's not a made-up story. That's how you tell history in their understanding. If you were to ask them, did these events happen? They're going to say, yes, absolutely they happened. But it's just again, that's why I started the conversation, or my commentary on it, with the cultural rivers. You have to be aware of how our rivers inform how we approach these kinds of texts. And so just not to belabor the point, I think you're absolutely right. And I would agree with you that the text is showing the decline, but I'm still not convinced that these ages are actual literal ages. I even think that the ages after the flood, when we get to Abraham and Jacob, the numbers are functioning rhetorically rather than literally. They're functioning rhetorically. That's what I'm convinced of.
Good stuff. So we've got to get here, because this is so Genesis 9. I want to get to Genesis 9, and Jay, if you'll pull that up in the CSB, and let's read. I want to read the section that is most relevant to the okay. So beginning at verse 18, and there we go. Verse 18 to verse 27 is the pericope here.
So you want me to read from 18?
18 to 20.
Okay, I got you. All right. So Genesis 9:18 says, Noah's sons who came out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan. These three were Noah's sons, and from them the whole earth was populated. Noah, as a man of the soil, began planting a vineyard. He drank some of the wine, became drunk, and uncovered himself inside his tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father naked and told his two brothers outside. Then Shem and Japheth took a cloak and placed it over both their shoulders, and walking backward, they covered their father's nakedness. Their faces were turned away, and they did not see their father naked. Verse 24, when Noah awoke from his drinking and learned what his youngest son had done to him, he said, Canaan is cursed. He will be the lowest of slaves to his brothers. He also said, blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem. Let Canaan be Shem's slave. Let God extend Japheth. Let Japheth dwell in the tents of Shem. Let Canaan be Shem's slave. Verse 28. Now Noah lived 350 years after the flood. You're on mute, D. You're on mute.
There we go. All right. Yeah, I did that because I think there was some feedback between my mic and your speaker. But nevertheless, so in Genesis 9, so what we want to talk about is there are two things that we've got to deal with here. The curse of Ham. But before we get to the curse of Ham, we need to talk about what's going on here in this particular text, right? So as we read, Noah had gotten drunk, and he was laying, the text says, uncovered in the tent. That meant that he was naked. And so he takes his own clothes off. He's drunk, and he is inebriated, intoxicated, whatever. And in verse 23, Ham, the father of Canaan, so it specifically points that out, saw the nakedness. It uses the word saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers outside. And it says, then Shem and Japheth, they essentially walked backwards with something to cover their father, to honor him, because he's lying in an obviously dishonorable state, right? I think everybody would agree with that. And it even says they laid it on both their shoulders and walked backward and covered the nakedness of their father. Their faces were turned backwards, and they did not see. So they're intentionally not wanting to look on their father in this dishonorable way, right? And so I think we can see obviously some honor, dishonor going on here in the text. I think that's clearly at work here in the text. Verse 24 says, when Noah awoke from his wine, he knew what his youngest son had done to him. And he says, not cursed be Ham, but cursed be Canaan, servant of servants shall be to his brothers. Now, Rick has written an incredible article that actually appears in the Warren Journal of Theology. I think if you get a chance to read that, Rick might be able to leave a link to that article. But he wrote an incredible article in the Warren Journal of Theology, and the article is titled "Ham's Sin Reconsidered: Filial Betrayal, Narrative Logic, and the Cost of Sexualizing Genesis 9:20 through 27." Now, I think, again, I'm kind of a both and dude. So as you could see, in the last consideration, I think I take some of what Rick was arguing and a more literal. I think there's a both and going on here. I think I clearly see the filial dishonor going on here in the text. I think it's possible, though, and again, I won't put my head on anybody's chopping block for this. I'll just argue that I think it is plausible that there is something sexual going on. Now, I'm going to I'm going to let Rick Cook, let him build his argument out the way that he argued it in his journal article, which I think he did masterfully, by the well. It was so exegetically clean that, you know, you got to read it. Like, I was like, man, this is one of the best scholarly articles that I had ever read on the subject. And I have read numerous articles and even commentary entries on it. And Rick his article is superb. But I think that there is a both and. I clearly see the honor dishonor piece going on here, the tension. But I think that there is something sexual going on in the sense that I don't think the sexuality, the perverted sexual connotation here has anything to do with Noah's wife. I think it has something to do with Noah himself. So I'll explain why later. I think that's at least plausible to consider. But let me let Rick Cook here and give his argument. Yeah. There we go.
Do you see the slide in like I have a slide deck I've already uploaded. If you put me in the presentation.
Oh, there you go. There you go. Excellent.
Yeah, right there. Right. Yeah.
Do you need me to
no, I think I can. Yeah, okay. I can move it myself.
Good deal.
Yep.
Good deal. Good deal.
And so what we're doing here is looking at this. I'm looking at this through the lens of filial dishonor, meaning what I'm saying is I don't think that there's anything sexual happening in this text. And the reason why I am confident to say that is because the narrative data does not lead me to that. If I look at the narrative itself, and I don't go anywhere else in the Bible, I don't go to Leviticus. That's where people usually go. That's really supports the sexualized reading. Leviticus 18, Leviticus 20. That's really where it's bolstered. People will uncovering the nakedness of the father means you're sleeping with your mother, or you're doing some type of impropriety sexual action. And I would vehemently argue that's exactly what the terminology means in Leviticus. But this is Genesis, and this is a completely different genre of writing. You have narrative, historical narrative here, and then you have legislative law, and it's just a different genre of writing and different time period. And the terminology, the vocabulary is not even the same. Even the term for uncovered nakedness that's in Leviticus is not found in this text at all. You don't see that in there. And so the reason why people will like to, well, in my estimation, part of the reason, not the sole reason, part of the reason is because there is a proportionality problem. Why is Noah announcing this curse? If it's just filial dishonor, if he just dishonored the father in the sense of by seeing and telling, because that's what I'm arguing for. Why is that the case? And people, because they're like, that can't be that bad from our perspective, I guess. But in an ancient Near Eastern perspective, when you dishonor a father, you have just committed the unpardonable sin, if I could just use that sort of forceful language. Because honor in the Bible is something that is at the forefront, especially honor your parents. When you look at the 10 Commandments, the only commandment that comes with a promise is the one that would honor your father and mother so that your days may be long in the land. That's the only one that comes with that. And the even when we look in the wisdom literature, there's the Proverbs. In Proverbs 30, it'll talk about dishonoring the father, the one who dishonors the father. And I have that later on in the slide deck here. So what I'm arguing for is that the logic of scripture pan-canonically does place an emphasis on honoring parents. Even Jesus, he's hanging on a cross and he makes sure to honor his mama. he makes sure he takes care of her. And so it's at the forefront of filial relationships as it relates to parents and children. And so moving on here, you have the different aspects, the different viewpoints that are prominent in looking at this text. You have maternal incest, sexual assault, which would be what Damon is offering, and even in some of the Jewish literature on this that was written well after this. They have castration as a possible understanding of what's happening here. But my analysis has landed at catastrophic filial dishonor here, and so that's where I'm going to explain how I got there. And so here's what you have. This is our exhibit A for the evidence here, and I'm going to present a bunch of the different exhibits as will lead you to this sort of understanding here. So you have Noah's state here. He laid uncovered. Now this is written in the Hithpil stem. Now this is very significant because the grammar indicates that this is reflexive or it's incidental. It's
acting upon.
Yeah, and so it's not that Ham disrobed his father. It's that Noah was simply vulnerable. So the possibility is Noah became uncovered, meaning maybe he moved around and became uncovered, or he, in his drunken state, while he was still sort of maybe conscious, uncovered himself. But the point of the Hithpil stem here is that he did it to himself. That's the point. And so the other the verbs here, you have saw and told. I have them up for you right there. Vayar and vayaged. These are about perception and being told, essentially. So that's what's happening. That's the only verbs that are indicating what's happening in the text. Now, you have the quote up there from Kenneth Matthews. He writes about this. He says, Ham's reproach was not in seeing his father unclothed, but in his outspoken delight at his father's disgraceful condition. And you see that in the text when he goes out and tells the other brothers. You see that there in the text there. Now, moving on, just real quick. Now, if you want to get a more expanded view of what I was saying about that, you got to go read the article. But just for the sake of time, I'm going to move through these very quickly here, right? Now, the text sets up a contrast between Ham and his brothers. Now, you see there, you have Ham, he saw the nakedness, he told the brothers, and so the theme there is exposure. He's exposing the father. And then the brothers are doing the exact opposite. They are redressing the problem that Ham has introduced. They take a garment, they walk backward, they cover their father, and the literal phrase in the Hebrew is their father's nakedness, not they saw. Essentially, they take a posture of discretion and covering. Also, we also have to take into consideration, this is something I did not cover in my article, but when you look at the language, what Jason just read, you have to hear Genesis chapters 2 and 3. You hear garden language here. You hear Adam language here again, because when it says Noah became a man of the soil, literally in Hebrew, that is a ha'adamah. That's what it will say. That Noah became a ha'adamah, a man of the soil. He plants a garden. We're using language. So the language that's already been put in the text. He plants a garden. And he takes from the fruit of that garden and sins. He gets drunk and becomes naked, essentially. And so you have the exposure that's happening in the nakedness that's being told here again, and the covering. And so you also have to keep in mind throughout all of these different texts that you see in the book of Genesis, Moses is telling the story of the enmity, the enmity between the seed of the promise and the seed of the serpent. And the different characters that you'll see that are explained in the text itself are either falling on one side or the other. Ham obviously falls behind the characteristics of the line of the serpent, and Shem and Japheth, Shem in particular, fall under the line of the promise because Shem, the Israelites, they stem from Shem in particular. So that's what's also being told there, just rhetorically in the text itself. Now, this is why dishonor warrants a curse, because in the ancient Near Eastern household, the father was the center. He was the keystone of your family's honor. So when you dishonored your father, you essentially alleviated, excluded, disavowed your own honor for your family. You wouldn't do that. For instance, even in the ancient Near Eastern text, when you're looking at, I forget which text it is. I have it written down in my article, but it talks about a son and his duty to take the father by the hand and when he's drunk or satiated by wine, and walk him home. The point is the son is supposed to guard the honor of the father, even when the father is acting in an improprious, dishonoring way. That's the role of the son as it relates to what the normal expectations are in the ancient Near Eastern world. And so you see Ham not doing that. And so that's also at play here. And I think it really describes the offense and the severity of it. When an ancient Near Easterner would have heard of this, they would have immediately picked up on the fact that Ham is not acting like he should be acting, and that Shem and Japheth are acting like they should be acting, even though Noah himself shouldn't have been acting the way that he was. But the point of Noah's actions is merely incidental to the larger point of the story, which are in view, which would be Ham and Shem and Japheth here.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and this forms the canonical witness pan-canonically across the text. You have the law itself. I already talked about how in the Ten Commandments, the promise comes with the honor and the father and of the mother. But in the law itself, dishonoring or striking a parent carried a capital offense. The Proverbs talk about the eye that mocks a father will be plucked out by ravens, utilizing the same looking. If you are one that mocks your father, then your eye will be plucked out. And then you have the prophet sort of iteration of it in Micah chapter 6 and Ezekiel chapter 22, verse 7. These indicate that the contempt for the father and the mother is listed as one of the primary signs of total national collapse. When children dishonor their father and mother, it's a covenantal sign of the decline of the society when that takes place. And so my point in sharing this is showing that the Bible puts at the forefront, it foregrounds the necessity for honor to be placed toward the parent. And that's just something that's at the forefront in Scripture. Now, moving on to the next thing here, I think this is one of my key arguments. I think where Damon might push back a little bit on me right here.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I would say that this is an anachronistic thing to import the Levitical laws into the Genesis narrative, right? You have the verbs here that are vastly different. The verb in Leviticus, as you see on the screen here, to uncover is galah. The verb in Genesis 9 is ra'ah, to see, right? And so the point in me bringing this out is that the logic is circular. So in order to see it this way, you have to assume that Genesis is speaking in the same terms that Leviticus is speaking in, and it sort of supports itself in that sense. But the assumption needs to be challenged because the text does not utilize the same language. It doesn't utilize the same verbs. It's not written in the same genre. And for instance, we didn't need Leviticus to tell us that murder was wrong. Murder was already assumed wrong. You already noticed that in Genesis chapter 4, when Cain murders Abel, you know it's wrong. Look at the explanations, the reaction by Cain, the reaction by God. There is no sense in which this is just morally it's amoral because the law isn't there yet. Mm-hmm. And so the point is that the text can speak on its own terms, utilizing its own logic within its own within the terms that the text is providing for us, essentially. And I don't need to bring in Leviticus in order to explain the reticence of the text, when in reality, I don't think Moses is being reticent at all. He's not hiding anything. He is providing the actual instance, the actual actions. And I think those actions provide the actual crime itself instead of imposing things later on from the Torah itself onto the text. And this is also another instance of it where word study is not the same as illusion in the text. Now, I'm pulling from G.K. Beale, and he's in his book, he was building off of Richard B. Hayes' arguments about the criteria for how illusion works in the text. For illusion to work in the text correctly, you have to have some textual signals or something textual to hook the illusion on in the actual narrative itself, as I see it, there are no literary hooks that hook Leviticus onto Genesis in this text. It's because the events that are being narrated are utilizing the verbs of seeing, wherein the law is utilizing the verb that I previously mentioned to you, galah, or the uncovering of the nakedness. And it's utilizing in a sense of a legal category. You cannot do this. You cannot sleep with your mother. You cannot sleep with your daughter, so on and so forth. Those are the things that are covered in Leviticus 18. And so to claim that Genesis is alluding to a sexual crime, there must be some textual hooks or echoes that are there, but there aren't any in Genesis chapter 9. And this moves on to the cost of sexualizing the text itself. This was obviously one of my primary emphasis as to why I wanted to write about Genesis 9. I wanted to remove the sexualized reading, because the sexualized reading has been used, especially in our country, to relegate African American people to a particular social status because of things like are written by Josiah Priest in the Biblical Defense of Slavery. He uses Genesis 9 and he writes about that the African, or he uses the N-word there, the African has this baleful fire within them. We have this unchaste amour within us that we have to be subjugated. Otherwise, we will be out just doing sexual things. So our natural state must be in subjugation so that we will not engage in such actions. And I think that, again, a part of the reason why the church in America was supporting the idea of slavery, of enslaving Africans, it was built on these types of readings, the curse of Ham. I mean, in reality, Ham is not even cursed in this text, right? Ham's not cursed in this text, Canaan is. And the Hamites, Ham has more children than just Canaan. He has Cush, he has other, I forget the other children he has. And so it's a complete misreading of the text itself. And it terminates in these bad understandings, terminate in horrible orthopraxy toward people, a just complete disavowing of the image of God in people. And so that's just my point there. And I think that the verdict that I wanted to move us toward was seeing this, that the text, it supports seeing and telling versus covering and blindness, right? And there's no sexual verbs found in this text. The grammar itself, veeda, new, takes a clausal object. This is something I didn't cover in my slide deck. But when you look in the halot in particular, the halot, when it wants to talk about a clausal object as opposed to a personal object, as in, like, for instance, when it says Adam knew Eve, that is a personal object. That's why they know it means something sexual. In the text, the example of a clausal object that the halot will use is Genesis 9:24. And that is not meant to indicate something sexual. Also, something I didn't cover in this slide deck is that the text itself, the writer, Moses, knows how to indicate something sexual in the text. The larger Old Testament knows how to indicate something sexual. When we talk about Genesis chapter 18 or the Sodom and Gomorrah epic there's no ambiguity. You know exactly what's happening in that text. There is sexual immorality happening. You don't have to guess. You don't have to speculate. We don't have to speculate that there's some sexual immorality happening with, for instance, David and Bathsheba. You don't have to guess in that regard. Moses knows how to be very explicit as it relates to sexual improprietous actions in the book of Genesis. And he doesn't include those same sort of words, the same sort of explicit language in Genesis 9. And I think the absence of such language is him saying that isn't the actual act itself. He's not asking us or inviting us to speculate on the action. He's giving us the actual actions, and he's asking us, the reader, to place ourselves within the world that he's writing into, wherein filial honor is at the foreground of what is expected of children. And so a child that does not do that is already, at least in the ancient Near Eastern world, is already looked at as outside of the norm. And again, later on in the Torah itself, this lack of honor toward the parents, in some instances, does carry a capital offense. The Bible, again, will continue on talking about the necessity of it. It'll, like I said earlier, it becomes a assessing factor for the health of the covenant community if the children are honoring their parents, and it uses as a part of the reason for the impending judgment that will be visited upon Israel's because they have forgotten to honor their parents. And so I think because of all of that, the text is not foregrounding sexualized improprietous actions. It is foregrounding filial dishonor, a lack of honoring the father as the actual egregious crime in the text. All of that to say that there is nothing sexualized happening here, and there definitely isn't any exegetical basis for the curse of Ham or for the need for the enslavement of African people because they are just balefully just unchaste, and we must be under some chains in order so that we will be restricted from doing so. I think all of that is just not in the text at all. But I've been talking a little too long. But go ahead, brother.
Can I just say something, D, before you go in?
Absolutely.
We probably about a year ago now, the same thing you guys see happening on this live. Rick and I had this same conversation in Bible study. And this is one of the amazing things that I love about our brotherhood and our community. I held the same position as Damon holds, and you will hear even more, it being a sexual sin. However, after having this conversation in Bible study, seeing it play out, and one of the greatest arguments, and this is one of the things that some people use as, oh, you guys think you're so this because you know the Greek and Hebrew. It's not about being smart. It's about being right with the text. And authorial intent is one of my favorite sayings, because the moment we move away from what the author was trying to communicate to his audience, we've totally missed it. And I just wanted to share with you guys, this is why it is important to have teachers and scholars within the church to be able to have these conversations, and not only have these conversations, but let's be true to what the text says. And at the same time, I think the last term we learned last week was theological humility. Yeah. We all need to have that. And I love the fact that this is probably one of the first, I'm not saying it hasn't been done, but this is one of the first lives or two lives we've been a part of where people are having antithetical views, but at the same time can have it without demonizing the other.
Absolutely.
And, really appreciate Rick and Damon for this part of the text.
Not without a doubt, bro. That's there we go. Yeah, that's huge for us to practice and model that type of humility, because we don't know it all, and we are approaching these texts as readers that are seeking understanding, admitting that there are things in the text that convince us one way or the other, but that we are uncertain in the sense that we can't be 100% in an absolute sense about what's really going on. And so we bring scholarship to the text to say, here's what I think scholarship is showing us that lends support to what we're reading. But again, at the end of the day, there's not scholarly consensus on this. And that is because people see evidence, and evidence shows them different things, right? So And so I'll say this. So in my position, I definitely think filial honor is part of it, because you do see this honor dishonor kind of motif going on in the text. So I don't see that as problematic to a possible, hear me use that word, possible, plausible sexual reading. Right now, I am unconvinced, and Rick and I, we've had this conversation as well. And so I'll say this. So to go back to some of his argument about how in Genesis 9 the word uncover, which from the idiom uncover the nakedness that you find in Leviticus 18. Well, he makes the argument that the word uncover is not there in Genesis 9 in the Hebrew, and that's true. But from a lexical grammatical standpoint, that's not necessarily convincing in and of itself, because the word erwat or nakedness functions as a sexual idiom all by itself, so it doesn't need the qualifier uncover in order for it to be sexually idiomatic. So that's one of the arguments that I would make is that the word, and the reason that erwat or nakedness is a sexual idiom all by itself is because it can point to sexual activity, and it can also literally just point to genitalia. And so I get it. Moses definitely knows how in Genesis to be very explicit. Like he tells us that Judah laid with Tamar. I get it. He knows how to be that way. But I don't think that he is necessarily suppressing explicit language here. I don't think that's what's going on. I think what's happening here. So let's again contextualize who the author is and what the author is communicating. So I think we all agree that the author here is Moses, right? And that when Moses is writing this is the time period that the Israelites are encountering the Canaanites. Now, I'm going to come back and get that point and show you why I think that there is an intertextual connection. And so, one of the other arguments that Rick made that doesn't convince me is this notion of anachronism. But if you accept the authorship of Moses, it's not anachronism unless you're pointing to some sort of chronological gap in the writing, which can't be proven anyway. It's not anachronistic because Moses is the author. I'll give to and concede to the point that from a genre standpoint that there is distinction, that Leviticus is pointing to things that are more concerned with purity, and Genesis is obviously chock full of historical narrative, but that there is a connection between the two, right? This is the Torah. So none of this is unrelated. Let me give you an example of what I mean. And so I think that Moses is portraying Canaanitic culture throughout the Torah as confirmation to what the curse announced. So if we go back into the text, Genesis 9, because you got to ask yourself this question. So whether you agree that this was just dishonor and that was it, or maybe it was dishonor and some sort of sexual thing going on, I think what we have to all admit is that Noah does not curse Ham. Whether we use Rick's verbs, saw and heard, right? Those are the two verbs that you use, correct, Rick? Right. Saw and heard. Whether we use the two verbs or not, Ham is the one from an action standpoint committing Again, whether you land with sexual issues or dishonor, Ham, do we agree? Ham is the one committing the sin, whether the sin is dishonor or whether it's sexual or a combination of both. Ham's the one committing it. And yet the text tells us in verse 22, and Ham, the father of Canaan, notice how that's not even parenthetical. It's written in there in a literary way to communicate a point. Ham's got other kids. Why is Moses saying here in Genesis 9? This is how I'm going to tell you. I'm going to draw the line between Genesis 9 and Leviticus 18 so that you can see that Moses is that one is not necessarily the latter is not being read back into the other, that there is a line between the two that textually connects what Moses is communicating. The fact that Moses points out that Ham is the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his brothers outside. Now, once Ham commits this act, whatever it is, again, combination of both, one or the other, at this point, Ham commits the act. We're all agreed on that. Yet, the text tells us in verse 24, when Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be to his brothers." Now, I want to draw the connection for you. Now, in fact, I'm not drawing it. I'm going to show you the connection between Genesis 9 and Leviticus 18. So it's not simply in the idiom. I think if you just make it the idiom and say it's anachronistic, that doesn't treat Leviticus 18 in the fairest way. So let's go to Leviticus 18. I want to show you several verses. Let's read Leviticus 18, verse 3. So Leviticus 18, verse 3. Watch this. And the Lord spoke to Moses, I'll start at verse 1, saying, "Speak to the people of Israel and say to them, I am the Lord your God." Right? So one of the things that we've got to start looking at is what's going on here. God is calling Israel out of Egypt, and they are walking through the land. And Yahweh has concern for them picking up on the practices of the nations around them. This is why you have a lot of the ordinances and the statutes that you have in the Torah, because they're concerned with Yahweh regulating behavior, the behavior of the Israelites from learned behavior from the nations around them. And so from a literary standpoint, when Moses is writing Genesis 9, this would have occurred before Moses is alive. But it's not anachronistic because Moses is writing it as Israel is in the land engaging with the Canaanitic people. So he's not writing anachronistically. He's writing at the time period, the same time period of what is going on in the land. And so look at what Yahweh says to Moses: "Speak to the people of Israel and say to them," because he's obviously calling for covenantal loyalty and faithfulness. "I am the Lord your God." Watch this. "You shall not do as they do in the land of Egypt." Don't practice what you learned back there before I delivered you out of Egypt. But watch this. He says, "Where you live." And look at this. Verse 3. "And you shall not do as they do in the land of Canaan, to which I am bringing you. You shall not walk in their statutes. You shall not follow. You shall follow my rules and keep my statutes and walk in them. I am the Lord your God." Let me show you several other verses. Skip down to verse 24 and 25. Now, this is the same chapter where you have all of that: "Uncover the nakedness of your father and of your mother," and all of that, right? Rick's point is that that's not informing. We can't read this and then read that back into Genesis 9. I'm arguing that it's not anachronistic, so you don't have to read back or forward, that they are intertextually connected. Look at verse 24 and 25 of Leviticus 18. He says, now remember what we had just read about him telling them not to practice the things of the Canaanites. This is what he's saying in Leviticus. Verse 24, do not make yourselves unclean by any of these things, for by all these, that is, these practices, these sexual perversions and all of these things that he considered abominable, he says, by all of these, the nations I am driving out before you have become unclean, and the land became unclean, so that I punished its iniquity, and the land vomited out its inhabitants. But you shall keep my statutes and my rules and do none of these abominations, so forth and so on. Here's my point. Moses is making an explicit argument here that the Canaanites are being expelled from the land precisely because of the sexual and the household violations that Leviticus 18 catalogs. This is canonically significant for several reasons. Number one, it ties Canaanite identity directly to the violations of household sexual order. What we're reading in Genesis 9 is possibly a household sexual perversion or a violation of that order. What Rick would have to assume is that that's not known. That ethic is not known until Leviticus 18. And I'm saying he has to assume that. But in assuming that, he has to prove that. And just like, watch this, we see specific command to sacrifice in particular ways in Leviticus, in Numbers, in Exodus. You don't actually see that in Genesis 4. Yet, we assume that both Cain and Abel understand that they are to sacrifice and also know what they are to sacrifice. And yet the text doesn't tell us. Are we to assume that the later text in, for instance, Exodus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and Leviticus are anachronistic to that? We don't have to, because it's the same writer. We can make the proper inference that Adam teaches his children that they are to sacrifice. And how would Adam know that? Well, because God offered the first sacrifice for him and evidently said, here's the way that you all are to do this in order to, according to what I'm expecting. And so my point is this, is that what we are seeing in Genesis 9, and the reason that Moses continuously points out Canaan is because it is, from a Genesis 9 standpoint, it is projecting a behavior that Canaan's descendants would behave, would portray, that this is how they would live and how they would act. But from the standpoint of Moses, from a palimpsest standpoint, this is not a projection. This is not something that's happening in the future. This is something that he is seeing and the Israelites are seeing in their very day. And what Yahweh is pointing to is, here is the beginning of a root of behavior that ultimately becomes characterized by what becomes the Canaanitic people. And Yahweh specifically says in Leviticus 18, it is precisely because of these sexual deviations and these violations that I literally vomited them out of the land and gave it to you. And part of those sexual deviations are things like incest, bestiality, so forth and so on. So what we're really seeing in both Genesis 9 and Leviticus 18 is covenantal judgment. What God is saying is, you are not to act the way that they act. If I put them out of the land for that behavior, what do you think I'll do to you if you act that way? So what is he saying? Moses constructed this because it is informing the Israelites that you are not to behave like Ham and Ham's son Canaan, who ultimately Ham's behavior became characteristic of not only Canaan, but Canaan's offspring. And you are not to learn to behave that way. And when we look at Canaan, while they are known for a lot of things, child sacrifices, so forth and so on, what Yahweh is pointing out in Leviticus 18 is all sexual deviation. And he literally specifically says, this is the reason why I put them out of the land. I took it from them and gave it to you. And if you walk in my statutes, you'll be able to stay in the land. If you walk in their statutes, I'll kick you out the same way I kick them out. In other words, your sexual ethic is to follow what I have taught you, not what you have learned from the Canaanitic people, right? And so that is the intertextual connection. And so this frames the conquest that's happening in the text theologically as covenantal judgment. God judged them because of their behavior and then turned around and gave it to his covenant people, whom he warned that if they act the same way, that he would actually bring the same judgment on them and take the land away from them. So this retroactively illuminates what we are reading in Genesis 9 in terms of why Noah's curse is on Canaan rather than on Ham. The curse announced what the Canaanitic or the Canaanite civilization would ultimately become. So you've got two vantage points. From the vantage point chronologically, from Noah's standpoint, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, it is looking forward, right? Canaan doesn't have a people yet. He's just an individual. But the curse is not the curse is predicting, if I could use that term, what the Canaanitic people would actually be like. But because Moses is the author, this is what you would call prolepsis from the vantage point of the writer. Genesis 9 is in the past. So Moses is borrowing this historical narrative to speak to what is in front of them. And that is that they have been engaging with Canaanitic people and obviously learning from the Canaanitic people, and that there is some threat of assimilation. That's why, and you don't have to get all the way out to Leviticus to see that. When you're in Genesis 36, for instance, when Moses is talking about how Jacob led his family towards Canaan, notice it says towards Canaan. They stop off in a particular area, and the prince of that area, it says that Jacob's daughter, Dinah, that she goes out to view the daughters of the land. The point that Moses is pointing out is that here is this covenant family that they're following their covenant father, and they're supposed to be getting where Yahweh told Jacob to go. But while they're on their way there, notice how this is paralleling God leading the Israelites in the promised land, and they're passing through the land. What's happening in Genesis 36? Well, Tamar gets sidetracked. She goes out. This is a literary functional way of saying that she not only left the confines of her family, but she leaves essentially the covenant restrictions around how they were to live. And what happens? She becomes fascinated by how the people in the land around her were living. Well, it is in the context of this fascination that she actually gets raped by the prince of the land. And then what does the rest of the story tell us? They're like, hey, here's how we can make this right. Why don't you give your daughters to us and we give our sons to your daughters? Well, what is this doing? This is not what Yahweh is calling for. He is not calling for Israel to become like the nations. If anything, he wants the nations to become part of Israel so that they can live up under his Torah and his statute, right? So he doesn't mind. I want you to notice that intermingling is not the issue. Yahweh does not mind that the nations intermarry in Israel. What Yahweh does mind that Israel becomes like the nations and that the nations do not adapt Yahweh's law, his way of doing things. Yahweh is concerned with that. So assimilation was a major threat as the Israelites are passing through the land on their way to the promised land. And over and over and over, from Genesis to Deuteronomy, we hear this constant refrain of warning the Israelites, do not pick up any of what you have learned along the way. If you do, Yahweh will deal with you in the same way that he has dealt with them. This is why, till this day, we don't practice Israel priority type theology. All these folk thinking that, well, all we got to do is treat Israel, political Zion Israel, favorably, and we'll be all right. They could not have ever read the Bible, because Yahweh treated his own nation the same way he treated other nations. When they got out of line, he dealt with them the same way. Right. So we can't possibly function in this type of theology that causes us to think, well, no matter what kind of evil we do, as long as we treat Israel good, God will bless us. Well, God whipped Israel and took the land back from them for their violations. Exactly. What was the exile? The exile was Yahweh bringing fulfillment to exactly what he said in Leviticus 18. As Israel started practicing idolatry, as they started practicing sexual deviation. Well, how do I know that? When you go and you read through the period of the kings, just before the exilic period, Yahweh, the text tells us that they were worshiping in high places. And culturally, what we know about high places is that they were not just places of worship. They were hidden places of idolatrous worship. And idolatrous worship was not only child sacrifice, but it was also prostitution offering as well. So there was this perverted sexual practice going on. And we do see Israel essentially adapting some of the cultural practices of the people around them. And what does Yahweh do? He takes the land from them in the very same way that he promises. So I can see where, and so for that reason, that is what convinces me that there is some plausibility of some sexual deviance going on. Now, I won't go so far as to describe exactly what that deviance is. It could have been of obviously an ancestral homosexual type nature. I'll leave that for speculation. But the fact that there is the possibility of sexual violation here is very strong intertextually and canonically here, because again, there is a one-to-one link between Genesis 9 and Leviticus 18, and it's actually named as not doing what the Canaanites did. And that description is all part of those uncovering the nakedness idioms and all of that is used. So that is why I think that the Genesis 9 text is pointing to, and again, I can still give way and give some credence to and some respect to the filial honor. I think that's part of it. I think that is informing the text, but I see a little bit of a both and here. So that's kind of where I land. And again, this is no legalistic reading here. Like, I'm not saying this is the only correct right way. I'm saying this is what convinces me that, and I don't see anachronism. So that's Rick's argument, but I don't see anachronism. I see the same author writing in the same time period. And while he may be using these for two different genres, that doesn't mean that they're disconnected. And I've already shown you how some of the materials in Genesis actually does connect to what we read in some of the other pieces, other aspects of the Torah. So that's kind of my argument. And I know we're not here to debate. We're here to discuss the text and obviously share why we land where we land. I'm sure Rick will probably want to come back and say, well, I disagree. Here's why. That's fine. That's what we're here to do. More than anything, we want you to be learning from all of this in the ways that we are respecting the text, holding it up to a high view, honoring scripture, studying and taking biblical scholarship serious, because we really want to, at the end of the day, get after what God is telling us. And the one thing about all of us here is we are really serious about that, right? We want to get after what's God saying here in the text, and we are not relying on what these so-called prophets are doing, where they are wanting you to believe that God is whispering stuff in their ear. Consequently, none of them can buy a vowel in exegesis, right? So no, we're not that type. If you want to know what God is saying, then you got to study to get after it, right? And at the end of the day, these discussions, we are hoping that we are setting a fire up under everybody that's listening to be like, I want to talk like these brothers. Like, these brothers know what they're talking about. Whether I agree with one or the other is besides the point. One thing is clear, is that they have the humility to have these conversations, disagree, even agree, and yet honor the authorial intent, or what they think the authorial intent is, and to do it in God honoring ways. Listen, if we're accomplishing that, then we're winning. We're winning. So there you go. I give it up. I probably talked a little bit longer than Rick on that, but I had to get it out. And sorry, because my mind is not as that's the ADD, right? It starts going all over the place. But hopefully I was able to bring it together so that you could see the cohesiveness and the cogent aspect of the argument, and see where I was going, how I got from Genesis 9 to Leviticus 18. So there you go.
Just real quickly.
Oh yeah.
This is hermeneutical humility in practice. You guys are seeing it right now.
Facts.
Absolutely.
Because it doesn't terminate on you're correct, I'm incorrect, or vice versa. It terminates on a humility wherein when you're in a discussion. Now, this does not apply to the core essentials of the faith. There is no nuanced. There ain't no nuance. Well, I don't believe in the resurrection. Nah, you're not a Christian if you don't believe in the resurrection. Sorry, you're not. You're not. If you don't believe in the Trinity, you're not a Christian. Sorry, you're just not. There's no nuance in that way. But as it relates to these secondary problems, this will probably even be a tertiary issue as it relates to biblical theology and just exegesis and at large. You should want to employ hermeneutical humility, and it's about probability. If you notice, and even in Damon's, he brings evidences, and then we weigh the evidence. One thing that I would challenge as far as the evidence is the term erva. Erva is not a term that automatically means sexual impropriety or some sexualized action. I can point to a dozen different instances in the text where erva is used and has nothing to do with sex. For instance, in 1 Samuel 20, it'll talk about to the shame of your mother's nakedness. It's nothing to do with sex. It has to do with insult or shaming your mother. The nakedness of Egypt, that in Isaiah chapter 20, verse 4, that's just the public humiliation of the captives. Isaiah 47:3, your nakedness shall be uncovered. It's the shame and exposure of Babylon as when the exile comes. Lamentations 1:8, they have seen her nakedness. That's Zion's disgrace and humiliation. Nothing to do with something sexual. And so just because erva is existing in the text doesn't mean something sexual. And that was something I looked into. I really looked into, because that's what I was meaning, that word study doesn't automatically, just because a word is used, the word has to be defined by its context. And erva can exist in contexts that have nothing to do with sexualized readings. And so based on all of that, one thing that I think I can get behind is the theology that Moses is communicating to his original audience, which would be Israel. It would be Israel at this particular point. And that is, again, because we also have that what's going on in the background is this enmity. And I know every time Rick comes off the mic, he mentions the enmity between the seed of the promise, because that's what's at play in this text. So I think his mention of Canaan is absolutely something that's significant to Israel. It's not necessarily because, again, I don't think this is written to Noah. It's not written to Ham. It's not written to Shem. Not written to Japheth. It's not written to Canaan. It's written to Israel about these individuals. And so what is Moses doing with the text? And I think that there could be a connection there. I can see that. But just based on the narrative data itself, I don't think that that's actually relevant to what Moses is talking about as far as the actions that Ham does. Also, I think that there is, when I use the term anachronistic, now this is something I didn't want to bore people with our White Ivory Tower seminary language, but there's diachronic exegesis here that I don't think is properly being employed when we use Leviticus. Leviticus isn't importing ideas or re-explaining Genesis 9. Diachronic exegesis is talking about how the progress of revelation develops over time. For instance, in my article, I use Matthew chapter 2 and Hosea chapter 11, I believe. Out of Egypt I have called my son, where Matthew will pick up that phrase. But when Hosea writes it, he's not talking about Jesus. He's not thinking about Jesus in the sense. He's talking specifically about Israel. But Matthew will appropriate the fullest expression of how God can call his son out of Egypt is found ultimately in Jesus Christ. And so reading that Christocentrically will have you import Jesus there, which I don't think is a right way to read Matthew or Hosea chapter 11 there. But I think if you look at it Christotelically, and I know Rohan is in the audience, Dr. Rohan is in the audience, and I've seen him write about a Christocentric, Christotelic sort of understanding of the text. If you look at it Christotelically, and here's what I mean by, let me just define my term here. Christocentric would mean you're finding Jesus in every single text. You're importing him there. Christotelic reading would mean that the ultimate fruition or the ultimate expression, the ultimate way in which this text can be finally, I guess, expressed or found is in Jesus Christ. And so, for instance, when we look at Genesis chapter 3, I would rather read that through a Christotelic lens, where the ultimate ending point of the enmity is going to be found in the man, Jesus Christ. He will be that one that will ultimately crush the seed of the serpent. But Israel is also a part of the way in which the conflict sort of transpires. They are to be in that conflict, but they're never going to win it because the Son is the one that will do it. And so reading that sort of Christotelically would help you inform how you read it correctly. But I would just say that not to just relitigate the entire whole.
Oh yeah, no. This is good. I think people are enjoying it. Go ahead, bro.
I think that just based on the narrative data itself, and my argument is not necessarily chronology, that this is in the chronology, because Leviticus is after. I would say literarily is where I'm really making it. It's literarily anachronistic to do that, because these are two different genres of writing. And in Leviticus, it is explicitly talking about sexualized actions, wherein the terminology in Genesis 9 is not using those terms. And I think because it's not using those terms on purpose, it's not meaning something sexual. And just because it's not something sexual doesn't mean it's something it's less egregious. It is absolutely just as egregious. We also see that in the text itself, covenantal consequences are incurred on actions that have nothing to do with sex. Look at Uzzah, or look at who was the guy that had the stuff in the camp? I forget was it Korah? I think it was his name. It wasn't Korah.
Yes, Korah. It is Korah.
Yeah, it was Korah. And his line was just cut off. Nothing sexual. But because he broke the covenant, the stipulations of it, and again, not honoring your parents is one of those covenant stipulations that does carry a capital punishment with it. And so the text does communicate times and instances wherein people take actions that have nothing to do with sex, and it carries a covenantal curse sort of format to it. As one of them, the Korah in the camp, Achan, all of those guys, those carry, and have nothing to do with sex there. So
right,
I think, you know,
it doesn't necessarily have to be sex. If I could jump in, want to just jump in and just kind of volley back with you. So again, to go back to Canaanitic practice and how that connects, you have to say Canaan is mentioned intentionally for some reason that relates to something that's future from the historical point of the text, but not future from the lens or the standpoint of Moses and the Israelites. Like when he's talking about the Canaanites, he's talking about the group. When he's going back into the historical narrative, he's talking about the person, and he uses the person to point forward to something. So let me show you again, just some more connection. Leviticus 20, there's some more penalties that are framed around the Canaanites in 22 and 23. I won't read all of it, but he says, you shall keep my statutes, all my rules, do them, that the land where I am bringing you to live may not vomit you out, and that you shall not walk in the customs of the nation that I am driving out before you. Everybody here, and I don't know an Old Testament scholar that won't identify the nation being driven out as the Canaanites. Like that's even in the Sunday school books. He says, watch this, for they did all these things, and therefore I detested them. And again, that's not reducible to only the sexual abominations. Like there are other things. So clearly Moses is defining Canaanitic cultural identity in precisely the same types of violation that we see in 9. But look in Genesis 15, for instance. I'll go through this quickly. Just in verse 16, he says, and they shall come back here in the fourth generation. He's talking about the Israelites. In other words, I'm going to bring you back here. But notice what he daisy chains to this promise to bring them back. He says, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. Again, the Amorites are part of the Canaanitic milieu. So what do we learn here? Several things. One, that the iniquity that is presented here is presented as accumulating towards a particular tipping point. And so you'll notice that God is essentially calibrating Israel's return to the land based on when Canaanitic moral corruption reaches its fullness. Literally, that's what he is saying in Genesis 15. And at that point, it had not yet reached the fullness. But by the time we get to Leviticus, it is. Because God is saying there, and he literally specifically says, and that is exactly why I am kicking them out of the land. And so we can learn something historically and theologically from this, is that Israel doesn't take over the land because of military conquest. Israel gets to inherit the land because Yahweh kicked the residents out of the land and gave it to them. And the reason he does it is tied to these moral violations. Same thing in Deuteronomy 9. Canaanitic wickedness is grounds for the dispossession of the land. It says it in verse 4. Do not say in your heart, after the Lord your God has thrust them out before you, that it is because of my righteousness that the Lord has brought me into possess the land. Right? So it's like, don't ever think that the reason you are here is because you did the right thing. So it has nothing to do, Israel taking the land has nothing to do with their rightness. It has everything to do with Yahweh bringing judgment on the Canaanites and then giving it to, causing his covenant people to possess it. So he warns them against this haughty attitude that the reason that they've gotten the land is because they've done something right. And then he corrects them. He says, just in case you think you're tempted to even think that way, he says, here's the reason. It is because of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord is driving them out before you. So again, the dispossession of Canaan is framed as moral judgment on a civilization and not their moral conquest. How does this go back to Genesis 9? Because the very first thing we have Yahweh doing to the Noahic family after they leave the ark is telling them about the land and the boundaries that he wants them to inherit and to be fruitful in. That is a direct line between what we actually see in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and in Deuteronomy. Again, in Deuteronomy 18, same thing. The abominable practices, verse 12. When you come into the land that the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not learn to follow the abominable practices of those nations. There shall not be found among you anyone who burns his son or daughter as an offering. That was Molech. So I agree with you there. It's not just the sexual things. It's anything that Yahweh defined as abominable, not just merely sinful, but utterly and completely morally detestable. Everything from Leviticus 18 and everything that is inclusive of idolatry are all categorically named by Yahweh as utterly detestable. So he names them. He says, anybody who offers his sons or daughters as an offering, who practices divination, tells fortunes, interprets omens, or a sorcerer, a charmer, a medium, a necromancer, or one who inquires of the dead. For whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord. And because of these abominations to the Lord, your God, is driving them out before you. So notice, again, there's that theme. And you see it not only in Leviticus, you see it in Deuteronomy. But here's all my point is to say this. My entire point is to say that the connection between sexual immorality and idolatry among the people of Canaan is a consistent Mosaic theme. Sexual disorder and covenantal unfaithfulness are organically linked throughout the Torah portrait of the nations that Israel encounters. And ultimately, all that is going on is this canonical portrait does not necessarily require choosing between filial honor, which I think is part of it, and some sexual reading. My whole point is to say is that the Canaanitic trajectory that the offense in Genesis 9 inaugurates includes sexual violations that Leviticus 18 later catalogs. And so Moses intends the reader of the completed Torah to see both layers simultaneously, the specific phileo betrayal and the broader pattern of covenantal disorder that it represents. Ultimately, the point is to say he's showing them that here is where this behavior ultimately begins for the Canaanites. It starts with Ham, it passes through Canaan, and ultimately it becomes characteristic of Canaan's descendants. And he starts very early to say that this is precisely the behavior that's going to cause me to kick them out of the land, to dispossess it from them, and then turn around and give it to you. And watch this. And while you're there, and while I'm giving you their land, don't mess around and start living like they were living, or I'll take the land away from you as well. I think that that is very clear in terms of not just a correlation, but a theme that runs consistent. So the genre is an unnecessary argument to make. Sure, Leviticus is a different genre than Genesis, but that doesn't make them disconnected. And I think we just have too many narratives in Genesis that literally point to what we are actually seeing in Deuteronomy and in Leviticus and Exodus. What Genesis sets up is the historical narrative that later informs the commandments and the ordinances that Yahweh has later given to Israel. So he's giving them an earlier a genesis, here's where that all began kind of a thing. And now this is why I am telling you not to do this, that, or the other. So the connection is actually there, irrespective of the differences in the genre. But listen, I think we probably have exhausted this point. I don't know if there's any other text in Genesis that you guys want to do, but I think what would be good is if, because we have used up so much time, but if we for a few minutes would bring anybody from the audience up, because we did promise that, and that's my bad for not being as timely as we said. But here is the link to coming on. So we'll try to take, here's what we'll do, because we're almost at about the 2.5 mark. We'll take about 3 or 4 on stage, and I think that will give us enough time to engage with whatever their question is or whatever their pushback is. And so since there is a time delay, I put the link in the chat. When you see it and you feel like you want to come on, go ahead and click on that link, and we'll see you in the in the back room. We'll bring you on stage and ask your question, and we'll go ahead and engage with you. And so let me see. There we go. Let me put it up here just so that you see it as well. If you don't already see it in the chat, there it is. Click on that. If you've got a question and if you have a pushback, just like we do in the comments, state your question up front, state your pushback up front, and then give us time to engage with it. And the only thing we all ask is that whatever your question is or your pushback is, that you have the same hermeneutical humility, that you have respect for all of us here, and that you're sincere in the way that you are engaging with us, that it's not some trolling thing or you got some axe to grind. It's okay if you are convinced about your point. That's precisely why we want you to come up here. Like, make your argument, like for real, like make your argument, and then do it with the same appreciation and value for scripture that we are modeling here as well, right? Not proof texting and being all over the place with, this and that, and, make the connection for us so that we could see how that verse supports what you think it's saying, right? So that's all we're asking. So if there's anybody out there and you are feeling froggy, you don't need to feel intimidated. Like, we're all down to earth brothers. Like, we shoot pool, we are down to earth brothers. Like, we'll have a beer with each other, you know what I mean, and talk trash with each other. Like, so trust me, you're in good company. Like, we are good Christian brothers. We'll clown you now if it comes down to no, I'm just playing.
Jason will clown you. He will.
So listen, we're waiting now. We're waiting. We're hoping that there's not too much of a delay here. But if you're feeling pretty good, come on.
D, let me just present one of the questions that was asked. It was a really simple question earlier about the order of the brothers. I believe it was Japheth, Shem, and Ham. Correct me if I'm wrong. That was just a question one of the individuals asked in the chat earlier on. So if we want to just affirm that that at least that question is answered, and then anyone else wants to come up.
Yeah, I'll say this quick, and I think you and Rick will probably agree. There are several mentions of them, and in other mentions, it says Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and so I don't think we know the order. I don't think we know who's older, who's younger. In fact, in Genesis 5, Noah was 500 when he started fathering them. It doesn't say who came first. We don't know whether they were triplets. We don't know who was older than the other. We don't. I think people assume Shemite priority because that's where the lineage, the covenantal lineage is going. But in reality, I think, and even if we're thinking from the standpoint of prototokos, the first doesn't have to be the firstborn in a genealogical, biological sense. It can be the first preferred, right? And in that sense, I do think that we start to see some Shemite priority, because this is the lineage that Abraham comes through, and then ultimately Isaac, and then Jacob, so forth and so on. That doesn't mean that Shem is actually the oldest. He could have been the youngest one, but there is some priority there. But I don't think there's too much to make out of Shem, Ham, Japheth, or Japheth, Ham, and Shem in terms of birth order or anything like that. I don't think there is. I don't think we can make much of that.
So what about verse 24? It says,
I think
yeah,
go ahead.
Okay, go ahead, bro. You got
we can determine who the youngest is, and that would be Ham. But of the other two, I don't know if Shem or Japheth.
That's good. You guys, 24, chapter 9 that we read, it says, sorry, Rick. When Noah awoke from his drinking and learned what his youngest son had.
I got it.
You see what I'm saying?
On that, yeah,
you good.
Ham clearly the youngest.
Right.
Yeah.
But Rick, go ahead, finish, bro.
Yeah, but that's you guys made the point. That's what I was saying. I don't think we can definitively know if Shem is older or if Japheth is older, but we do know that both of them are older than Ham.
Gotcha. I agree. I see that in the text. That's right. That's good. Good point. Good point out on that. Good point out on that. Excellent. Is anybody feeling up to it? Like we I never do this. And then the two times, I think we got 2 bites the first time. Right now, no bites. Come on now. Don't let us fish for so, like we need you to get on the hook. We need, is there anybody here? Well, there's somebody saying Japheth, Shem, Ham. But again, that's being certain. And all we're saying is, if you think that's the order, that's cool. Like, that's fine. But we can't say that with certainty, right? You can say that with a certain amount of conviction to say, well, I believe, I'm convinced that it's this way. But that's where the hermeneutical humility comes in. It is to say, I do not know for certain, but here's what convinces me, right? But when you say it is, you are speaking more definitively than what the text is. And that's where the trouble kind of begins, right? You to say it is, to say I think is more honest than to say it is, especially when we can't be certain, right? So that's what we're hoping also to get across too, is how to use language in a way that is graceful where the shadows exist in the text, the grays. But to be more definitive where it's black and white, right? And there's enough black and white in scripture that we can be like, it is this way or that way, right? But where it's gray, we can't be that way, brother. We just can't be that way.
Yeah.
Or sister, I'm sorry, Roberta Whitfield, right? You see what I mean? So hopefully that helps there.
I think to come along that point, come alongside it. And when you look in Genesis chapter 10 in the table of nations, so it'll mention, it says, these are just as another Toledot. We talked about that in the last session we had here. These are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now, if you read that, you're like, well, that settles the issue. But it starts off with Japheth, the sons of Japheth. Then it moves to the sons of Ham. And then it moves into the sons of Shem. So it's automatically upsetting this order if you're trying to look at it chronologically there. It's more so utilizing the Shemite priority as far as the terminology that Damon used, prototokos, right? First doesn't necessarily mean first in the sequence. It's first in priority. The first, like for instance, in the patriarchal narratives, the firstborn son, the guy that was born first, usually isn't the one that inherits the actual birthright. You don't see that sort of. Now that was the conventional thinking of the ancient Near Eastern world. The one that was born first is going to be the firstborn. But Genesis upsets that narrative altogether. It's because God chooses who is first. God chooses it. It's about it, who he chooses. And so even when you look at the rest all the way to you get to chapter 11 there, it terminates on Shem, because if imagine a funnel for me, the earlier chapters of Genesis moving to Genesis chapter 11 are funneling down to that Shemite line, and they're going to terminate on a man called Abram. That's where it is. And the funnel gets right to them, and then it's going to expand back out through Jacob and back into the tribes of Israel. And so it forms like a funnel, a bottleneck, and it's on the man that God chooses, Abraham. And so we didn't get into to 11 here, but that genealogy that's right in the middle of Genesis 11, right before you get to Genesis 12, is just further bolstering that point, because God is, through Moses, telling that story that the loss of sacred space is now going to be reaccessed through this line, through Abraham that God has chosen. And we ultimately know that the seed of Abraham, the ultimate seed of Abraham, will be Jesus. He will be that seed that will bless the nations, that will bring all the nations to God, and so on and so forth. And that's why Jesus will stand up and say, I must be lifted up so that I might draw all kinds of men to myself, and so on and so forth. And so the text, it doesn't read as concretely in a lot of areas that we would like it to. We have to track with how the writer is setting up the text, and he's not trying to give us a chronology. He's trying to tell us a theological story that is historically accurate. I mean, these events did take place, but he's not emphasizing chronology in these texts. And so you can have a view, like what we're saying here. You can have a view, but when you have it as this is it, you're already excluding other views, and you're operating outside of what we would encourage you to operate with, which would be hermeneutical humility.
D, you're on mute, bro.
I don't see anybody jumping on, but I want to say this with respect to 11. Man, there's so many beautiful things that are going on, and I do see the funneling effect there as it's moving down towards Abraham. You know, the interesting thing, you know, when we often talk about what Yahweh says to Abraham when he says that I want you to get up, and he says that you are to leave your father's land. And in fact, let me find it. He says, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And, you know, one of the interesting things to consider is where Abraham's country, most of us from Sunday school would remember Ur of the Chaldees, right? So this is the general area of Babylon that all of Shem's descendants, and even many of Ham's or Japheth's descendants, and some of them, this is where they kind of generally settle, but more specifically, Shem's descendants, right? This is where they are. So all of these folks, Shem and Arphaxad, Eber, Peleg, and Reu, and all these people, this is where they live. So when God tells Abraham to leave your country, he's saying, leave these folk. And I think what many of us have thought is, as we're reading through this genealogy, that by the time Abraham comes along, these folk are all dead. But again, I'm not trying to get you to be, you know, mathematicians. What I am saying is that if there's any literality to how old they are, some of these guys in Abraham's lineage actually overlap Abraham's life. Like, in other words, they are alive at the same time that Abraham is alive, although they're living in separate areas. Here's the interesting thing. In terms of the chronology and the math, if you want to be that exact, that would mean that Shem actually outlives Abraham by about 25 years. Now, that would sound crazy because it starts from Shem and it ends with Terah, and then Abraham is Terah's son. And to be like, oh, wow, Shem literally outlived Abraham by 25 years. But I think that's telling us something from a literary standpoint. One of the very first things that Yahweh says to Abraham when he calls him out is, I will make your Shem great. I will make your name great. And here's one of the things that we learn from wisdom literature, that a good name or reputation actually outlives you. Listen, a good name, a good reputation will live longer than you. And I think from a literary standpoint, I think Moses is cooking.
So that'll preach right there, man.
He lives longer than Moses. I mean, than Abraham, rather. He outlives him by about 25 years. And God said, I will make your name great. And through your seed, all nations of the earth will be blessed. Ultimately, what God does with the name is very significant as it relates to salvation. So I think this begins, whether Moses could see it all the way through or not is irrelevant. If the Holy Spirit is ultimately superintending the ultimate meaning here, I think that this is part of a larger redemptive narrative that ultimately culminates in what we read in Acts 4 and 12. And neither is there salvation in any other, for there's no other name under heaven given among men whereby we must be saved, right? So we see this salvation in the person of Yahweh, and then Yahweh the Son comes and actually honors the Father. And yet Paul says in Philippians that he starts with honor because he's in the form of God, the morphe tau theou. He humbles himself and takes on the morphe tau anthropos, and even the morphe tau doulos, or slave. And then ultimately through his obedience, Yahweh the Father exalts him and says, and honors him with a name that is great, right? And so ultimately, I think in salvific history, it's all ultimately pointing to the greatness of God's name. What God is saying that it's not necessarily in whether you call him Yahweh or Yahushua and all of that. It's pointing to his reputation, his covenantal faithfulness, his attributes, who he has shown himself to be throughout salvific history, right? And so I think that's part of the literary. I'm not saying Moses has got all that figured out. I'm saying as we're looking back teleologically through this hermeneutic lens, I don't think it's by chance that Moses starts with this Shemite priority, this lineage, and then we see this funnel that Rick describes, and it ultimately, at the very bottom of it, is Abraham, God's man, and then the first thing he tells him is that I'm going to make your name great, right? And which points back to his earliest ancestor, Shem. But God brings about ultimately through Abraham the true seed of Abraham, which is Jesus. That's Paul's argument in Galatians, and says, through your seed, all nations of the earth will be blessed, right? So I think when we're looking at the overarching redemptive meta narrative, we can see ultimately where that goes and how the wording, the framing is moving in a direction that even Moses can't ultimately see. He's got his intentions for why he's setting it up, and I'm sure they're brilliant. But the Holy Spirit sees even further than that. There is a what you would call a fuller sense in the text that I think is pointing to an ultimate, a Christotelic reality that finds its fulfillment in Christ. So I just see little neat things like that in the text, and I'm like, that's just too delicious to leave on the table and not say anything. So that's my homiletical and exegetical contribution to the conversation. But anybody want to say anything on that? Oh, we got a brother. Okay. I'm sorry. I am sorry. There we go. We've got a brother hanging in the background. I didn't see him.
Yes, sir. Won't nobody come on up, so I gotta come on up so y'all can keep up the tradition. Rick was talking about how just because a word is not necessarily like pointing to doesn't seem to be saying a particular thing. So it's not clear on it, but you were saying it's clear on it because of a certain reason. So I was trying to figure out, how did y'all come up with the conclusion of what it's actually saying or what's actually being rendered there?
For biblical words?
Yeah.
Like okay, so the Hebrews didn't leave us a dictionary. They wrote a lot of books. They didn't write a dictionary for it. The way that biblical scholars will determine a definition of a word is by its context. Like, for instance, erva, when we were talking about Genesis 9, is the word for nakedness in the text. There are other words in Hebrew that talk about nakedness. Erum is another word for it as well, but erva is the one that's used in the text. Erva is used in some sense to refer to sexualized actions, but the context leads us to that. In particular, in Leviticus 18, it is unavoidable. It's unavoidably sexual. The context helps determine that. But again, when you look at it, and I had some other things pulled up, the other texts where it's utilized, like, for instance, where it'll talk about the nakedness of the land. That's not talking about something sexual. The context of the usage of the word erva there determines that it's talking about the exposure of the land and nothing sexual at all. And so context determines the meaning as far as it relates to how we would understand what this word means, because it's existing within a context. So you have to look at how we would learn when we're learning English, context clues. It's literally what you're doing. So you're just looking at the context. And so that's kind of how you would do it.
Okay. If I could use another example as well, and I was hoping that these guys would stop at one point where I could jump in to say it. But we was talking about the length of time that people lived. God said to Adam, "In the day that you eat, you shall surely die." If we was to read that with as was said, a wooden and literal, we would expect that Adam would die immediately. Right. But when you go to the meaning or the literal reading of that text, the Hebrew says, "Dying, you shall surely die." And it all goes back to what Rick and Damon was saying simultaneously, really, which is the length of time some of these individuals lived. You see, Adam lived quite a while, according to the text. However, he didn't die physically at that time, but the death there is talking about the separation from God. Mm-hmm. However, physically, over a period of time, he is dying. So you see how the word is used there, not immediately saying that he's going to die there and then in that particular day that he sins. However, because of the context and because of how Hebrew is written, you find that this was actually saying over a period of time. Yes, you die immediately because you're separated from God. That's why God went and found them and reenacted that relationship. However, over a period of time, naturally and physically, he does die. So again, as he said, the looking at the whole conversation, the whole context of what's being said is going to help you to determine what that functional main word, how it's being used.
Okay, understood. Appreciate it. That was my question.
Hey, that was a good question.
Well,
that's a really good question.
I do want to show you this because I think that we do have some. Let me see if I think this is it right here. I want to show you this because this is really good. Hold on. Let me see. Let me see if this is it here. And let me see.
While Damon's looking for that, yeah. Edward, I have seen your question. We're going to get to it. I see it in the comments.
Yeah, and I've got another one for you as well, Rick, that was said earlier on by someone else.
Yeah. I just uploaded it, and for some reason I am not seeing it. Hold on just a second. Ah, there it is. This is kind of goofy, but Rick had mentioned that we don't have, you know, all of the lexical, we don't have the lexicon from, you know, early Hebrews. But I do want to push back on that here. I want to show this. We do. This is Moses's complete library here. He had the earliest form of Logos. That's a dad. This is the ultimate dad joke here. This is Moses's bookshelf. As you can see, this is every edition, like, you know, he's got all the lexicon, all that good stuff. All this is in Moses's library here. So I have to push back a little bit and say that we archaeological evidence has preserved for no, I'm just playing, but I just wanted to throw that out there. But no, he's right. We don't have we are approximating what we think about some of these terms based on how we see them being used in a near time period, right? And that's where cultural studies like ancient Near Eastern studies are helpful. They are not the hermeneutical lens that I think some people intend to use them as. I think they help to elucidate how we understand how people in that time period may have understood things. But we also have to consider the fact that what people, for instance, Rick said, for many of the people in that day, mythos or myth, they saw, many of them saw as real because that was their conceptual worldview. We see, however, for instance, like the divine council, Israel doesn't have the same conceptual worldview, right? So just because you have people in that day and time that believe that multiple gods existed, and we can show evidence that they did, doesn't mean that what they conceptually believe is also a reality, right? So that would not inform the text. What does inform the text is exactly why Yahweh would constantly say to the Israelites that you need to only worship me exclusively rather than the other gods. That's not Yahweh saying, I think the other gods are real. That's Yahweh saying, in the minds of the nations, they conceptually exist. And whether they exist or not, the point that Yahweh's making is that you are to exclusively worship me, right? So ancient Near Eastern archaeology and literature helps us to get some understanding of how people thought at the time. But even then, we've got to be careful that we don't read their conceptual thinking into the text and then think that there is no difference. And we have done that. We recognize places in scripture where Israel takes the conceptual culture of the time and then repurposes those things in ways that are consistent with what they are learning from Yahweh himself, right? So he's correcting their thinking as because in I would say in academic respects, right? Non-Christian academics would see the Israelites as Canaanitic people too, because they come from the same cultural milieu. They wouldn't make the distinction that we are making. They would be, oh yeah, it's the same people, right? You know, this, that, or the other. But what we see is we see Israel emerging out of a cultural context. And while they share cultural similarities, we also see specific and intentional ways that they reinterpret the culture in ways that align with what Yahweh has been teaching them, right? So you know, so those are just some things to think about.
I appreciate you. You ain't got to keep going, but because you said that, I got a term pulled up. I was looking up arsenokoites, the term for, I don't know, arsenokoites.
Homosexual.
Yeah, the homosexual. So would that be a good example of a term to use? How we I guess found a term for it in 1946, I believe.
Yeah, no, that actually I noticed that that's floating around. internet, and that's just entirely false. It's just, and I think if that proves anything, is what we all know, and that is if something gets repeated often, people start taking it to be true. But there's absolutely no truth in that. And Paul doesn't make the term up himself, and it's not something that gets added in later. Paul takes a term that's already recognized to mean, in fact, he uses two terms. One means the more effeminate person, which is what we would identify as the quote unquote bottom. And then the other term that Paul uses identifies the other participant homosexual as the penetrator. And these are terminologies that are known in the Greco-Roman world at the time. The way that Paul puts his own little spin on the word doesn't change the meaning of the word. That would be like me saying something like, if somebody says it was glorious, and I say it was gloriferous, right? You already know I'm talking about it was glorious. I just put my own superlative spin on the end as an emphasis, but gloriferous doesn't really mean anything different than glorious. It's just the way that I intended to communicate. So Paul does that, but that's also a common feature in writing from his time period. Like every ancient writer did the same kind of stuff. So that's not even unique to Paul, but the person who put that out is a queer, that comes from queer theology. And that's it's blatantly false is what it is. And it's not provable. And what they're hoping is that they're making essentially the fallacy by arguing from essentially the argument from authority. That is to say that if I have a degree in this particular field and I make this statement, then I must be correct. And the fact of the matter is they're not. And regardless of what degree you have, the onus is still on you to actually prove that argument. And that is not an argument that they can actually prove. That's an argument that conveniently supports the notion that Western sexuality was invented in more recent Western sexual ethic is a recent invention. And any honest historical purview will show us that Western sexual ethic is the result of the biblical sexual ethic. So in other words, the New Testament world essentially is the reason why the Western world even exists in the first place. So the Western world does not shape the biblical New Testament world. It's the other way around. There would be no Western world. Like the reason that we don't practice slavery is because of the New Testament, not because the Western world informed the biblical world, but the biblical world created and essentially gave shape to the moral the moral underpinnings of what ultimately became the Western world, from education all the way down to the sexual ethic, on and on and on and on. So this person is just flagrantly wrong. And I've heard it. I've seen people repeating it over and over and over, but they're incorrect.
Right. I appreciate y'all, because it's when you get online and say a scholar said, historians believe, and I'm like,
right. That's the argument. That's the argument. That's the fallacious appeal to authority fallacy there. That's what they're doing. It's like in commercials. They have this thing called scientific slanting, and they'll be like, 8 out of 10 dentists approve of AIM. Right. And you ain't seen no study. They're just trying to get you on the scientific slant to say, and here's the big idea. Well, if the dentist uses AIM, I should use AIM. Or they'll have somebody on the commercial with a white lab coat. Now, if you're really reading the fine print, it says this person is an actor. But what they want you to think is that they're a dentist, so that they can get your buy-in and commitment, your trust that, even a doctor thinks that AIM, when if you really go to the dentist, the kind of toothpaste they're telling you to use ain't even really sold in Walmart or the grocery store. They trying to get you to use some prescription kind of toothpaste anyway, right? So the reality is that most dentists are not using Colgate or Crest or AIM. They're using something else anyway. But that's the way they do it. And a lot of people use this appeal to scholarship in the same way. And we all here respect scholarship, right? So a person who has done the requisite learning deserves the respect to be heard out. Here's what they don't get to do. They don't get to use their education as a way to say this means that what I am saying is correct. They still have the onus to prove that, regardless of how many degrees they have or they don't have. What we owe them is the respect to hear them out, because they've done the work. They deserve to be heard and allowed to make their argument. And the way that they make their argument may be credible, but that doesn't make the conclusion right? So that's how we've got to deal with scholarship. But believe it or not, scholars will use that to their advantage when they have as many biases as anybody else, and they'll hope that they get to play in your face if you're not paying attention and be like, well, I'm Dr. So-and-so, therefore, and he might indeed have 2 PhDs, but that don't make what he's saying right on its face unless he can actually show the work in terms of right. So we've got to respect scholarship, but we also need to hold all arguments, scholarly and non-scholarly, to the same standard of accountability. How do you know epistemologically what you say you know? How did you get there, right? Everybody needs to do that. Yeah.
When I was in the peer review process for this article that we were discussing, that was one of the peer reviewers. That was one of his comments. He actually agreed with my thesis, but he was saying that I'm merely asserting it and not demonstrating it. Right. I had to go back and demonstrate, even though he was like, I agree with you. I agree where you're going, but he's like, you're not showing it. And so it's easy. A lot of times what you'll see is people will just merely assert things.
Yeah.
And they will not demonstrate them. The work really, if I were to show you my drafts, the article went completely different when I got that comment, because I'm like, you are absolutely right.
That's it.
I need to move from assertion to demonstration.
Yeah.
And that's where real scholarship is in demonstration.
And I think, to Rick's credit, and I have said this to him and to others, I think the strength in Rick's argument is the lexical grammatical work that he did. Like, I'll be honest, I come to some different conclusions, but it is highly impressive to me, the work that he did there. Like, he shows how he got to his conclusion by showing what's in the text and why he thinks you can't make this, this quantum leap from Leviticus 18 back to Genesis 9, or make the leap from Genesis 9 to Leviticus 18 because of, so he makes a really strong and impressive argument. And I respect that, right? And I think that's what scholarship does, is like, you got to respect at least the process and the way that a person argues, even if you disagree or differ to some degree. You got, what, I got mad respect for what you did there, and I think it is impressive, and it was highly integrous and scholarly, what he did there. But I would encourage everybody to read that if you get a chance. If Rick could post that link back up again, that would be great. But man, we really appreciate you for coming on and rocking with us, man, and appreciate you, brothers, for hanging out with me again tonight. I know we're moving in on the third hour of the night, and but this has been, I think this has really been, again, a great conversation, and maybe we can come back again, do some more chapters in Genesis, or maybe even another book in the Bible where we think that there's some problematic or challenging text that we could shed some light on and do the same kind of thing. But I'd love to have you brothers back and to do the same thing. And maybe we can still look through other sections of Genesis, because Genesis is pretty meaty, I would say. And I think there's still some other stuff on the bone that we haven't chewed.
I think we should finish the other 3 that we've got. That would be great, because I was setting up for that tonight as well. So yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, we have not talked about the flood.
Correct.
Oh my God.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. We got to do it.
Yeah, 19, 15, 17, and 22 as well. So we still got those chapters as well.
Yeah. Let me say this real quick, Jay. If you know Brandon McCray, right?
I've seen the name, and I'm just trying to. I was just trying to look him up to see if I know him.
I got to introduce you to B-Mac. B-Mac is Reverend Dr. Brandon.
Okay.
Got his demon from Liberty. He's a preacher par excellence, theologian, but he's a killer bass player, bro. Like, you got to know this dude. And I'm gonna introduce you to him. So he lives in the area. So I'm gonna introduce you to.
We need to meet, definitely.
Absolutely. Brandon's insane on the bass, and he plays like a gazillion other instruments too. Like, dude is like, what can you not do? Like, I hate these dudes, man. I hate that they can play instruments, sing, preach, teach, and do. Like, I am literally only one-dimensional. Like, all I can do is teach. That's it. I don't have any other talents. Well, I have some artistic ability in terms of drawing and painting, this, that, and the other. So I got 2. I got 2 on the board. But nonetheless, I got to introduce you to Brandon, bro, a great brother and friend of mine, and again, a theological mind, and he could easily fit in on this panel seamlessly, right? And so he's somebody. When I seen him pop in, I'm like, I didn't know if you knew him or not, but he's somebody you definitely need to know. And then I know you know this big head right here, Greg Johnson.
Yeah, we need to kidnap that dude right there. We need to kidnap him.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. You know, what I'd love to see is I'd love to see some of our sisters get up on stage with us as well. We'd love to kind of balance out the conversation and get some female theological expertise up here. And I can't ever get Michelle to come out and join us, but if she'll ever come out, maybe even Shawnee's in, I think she's working on her I think MTH or MDiv, or her second master's degree in theology. And we've got Rochelle. She pops in and out. She might be on here. Listen, I don't know all of y'all out there, but vote for somebody, volunteer somebody. Like, we want to get some. There it is. She's working on her MDiv. Yeah, we want to get some. Oh, without a doubt. Yeah, Rochelle is definitely the truth. And drop some names, because we want to get them up here too. We don't want people to think that talking about scripture is restricted to men, right? The word of God, learning the word of God, talking about the word of God is something that we all need to be able to do. And I believe that many of our sisters have incredible contribution to make, and often their voices are not heard. And I definitely want to leave space. So I don't want anybody to think that this has been intentional. It's just difficult often to get some of our sisters on. And I remember that one time that I was doing, you guys remember when I first did that one discussion on Carlton Pearson, and people were like, literally, they were just eating me alive on social media all over the place. Who's this guy think he is? This, that, or the other. And then we had put together a panel of different people. Some of them were liberal in their theology, and some of them were supporting Carlton Pearson's universalist kind of leanings, and this, that, and the other. And then it was just all men. Now, I had specifically, and so there was some people who had said, we don't see any women on there. And I tore it back that wasn't by design. When I was looking for the panel, I went after men and women. All of the women told me no. Like, they all told me no. One woman said the panel was beneath her and that nobody up there had any of the education that she had, and this, that, or the other. And so oftentimes the underrepresentation is not by design. It's that, we just oftentimes the sisters they don't show up. I just want to say, and I don't know why, but we want them to, and that's what we're trying to say. We want to hear your theological and biblical contribution as well. We just got to get y'all to stop being so shy and come on and share some of that brilliance that we know y'all have, right? And
this ain't the SBC. We not the SBC up here. You ain't got to sit down and be quiet.
Right. Ain't no more amendment.
Facts.
Right. So, yeah, there you go. But Michelle says every time she does something with me, she gets attacked. that may be true, because it's some dangerous business messing around with me. So, but no, but seriously though, we definitely want to get more of our sisters. So start thinking about that, y'all. We help us name drop, suggest some theologically minded, biblically minded. Hey, listen, we want to get that going. So again, thank you all. I know we're way over time. We really appreciate it. All of you brothers. Michelle, thank you again for being in moderating for us. And we haven't had any real hotheads in the chat for a while, and that's because we're not really dealing with high sensational controversial stuff. But once we start getting there, they'll rush over here to the Israelites and all the other people. Once we start kind of encroaching upon what they think is their biblical territory.
We got to put Charlie Kirk on the thumbnail, and they'll all come through.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And my brother Rohan, we need to get Ro back on as well.
Yes, sir.
Our Canadian brother. And he is finishing up his PhD as well. This brother is literally a walking lexicon. And you talking to Rohan is like actually reading a theological journal. like this brother talks in theological journalese. And but no, he's a sharp
bro.
Yeah, right.
You know he was the truth when in the comments he wanted to know which scholars I engaged in for my argument. That was his question. Hey, who were you reading from?
Right, exactly. And excellent pastor, preacher, and teacher par excellence. Thank you for hanging out with us, all of y'all. Thank you again. We love you. And go Knicks, go Knicks. Somebody said, y'all gonna talk? I was like, listen, we already up. So 2-1. We go back to the Garden tomorrow. Hopefully we can extend the lead 3-1.
Hopefully, no fake, brother. Hopefully.
Oh yeah. I think we can do it. What's your prediction though? What do you actually is gonna happen?
I really think Knicks are gonna win, to be honest, but I am rooting for Spurs, if I'm honest.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But tomorrow's going to determine it. I really believe if Spurs win tomorrow, yeah, Knicks ain't winning.
Oh, man. Okay. I get you. We don't need to see another repeat from 27 years ago. So we definitely need to do our thing. I agree with you. Tomorrow's a big game. All right, y'all. We appreciate it. Thanks again for hanging out with us. We love you, and we will see you on the next episode. God bless you. But I think that we need to be equipped to the point that we are at least what Peter said. He said, be ready to give an answer, not get ready.